I'm the highest civilization in the universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 326, Bad Temper. At this time, Li Ming and others were standing on the top of a mountain, and the teleportation array was also located inside the mountain, which was relatively hidden. However, it seemed that it was nighttime on Hangyu Star at this time, and Li Ming could only see the surrounding environment roughly. There were long mountains on both sides of the body and directly behind, and there was no end in sight. The farther end was only the darkness of the night. And there was a forest in front of the body, and in front of the forest was an endless plain, but there were patches of flashing spots on the plain, just like villages. However, because it was night, Li Ming's wisdom eyes could not see clearly, and he could only see roughly, so he felt a little strange. Looking at these, Li Ming said again, the environment here is complicated, and the place is large. Since we are the first to come, why don't we act separately, so that we can find Hang Ren faster? Delk seemed to think it was meaningless, but his eyes turned to Robson. Robertson hesitated for a moment and said, it's okay to separate, but, before he finished speaking, a figure suddenly flashed in the broken hole beside him, and 3 figures quickly jumped out of it. The sound of footsteps hitting the ground, the people coming, were Millicent and others. The 3 people landed on the other side of the hole, only 1 hole away from Li Ming and others. Seeing these people, Robertson and Elks were calm and there was nothing unusual, but Li Ming frowned when he saw Millicent. His thoughts turned back, and he recognized this person in a few seconds. When Millicent saw Li Ming, the corners of her mouth couldn't help but rise slightly, revealing a hint of evil smile, with a bit of joy in her expression, as if she had been looking forward to seeing Li Ming for a long time. Finally see you in person, he. The cold tone and weird laughter all revealed murderous intent. Li Ming's narrowed eyes saw through the other party's mind. He stared at the other party without moving, and whispered, that guy from the 1.1 civilization is coming for me. You two better stay away. This whisper made Robertson's face suddenly change. Robertson didn't know the entanglement between Li Ming and Millicent. He only knew trade among the 3 people on the opposite side. Because they were in the same alliance, they were not on guard. But when he heard what Li Ming said, he suddenly froze and looked at the opposite side with caution. Millicent's eyes didn't see anyone else at all. After staring at Li Ming for a few seconds, her body suddenly moved. I saw a faint flash of light, like a sudden shining star appeared in front of me. The light was Millicent's fist. While launching the attack, a layer of silver metal suddenly appeared on the surface of Millicent's fist, as if she was wearing a metal glove. Seeing this move, the 3 people on Li Ming's side stepped back and jumped away. Robertson jumped to the left, Delks jumped to the right, and Li Ming stepped back to a distance. Bang! With a slight sound, Millicent's metal fist hit the ground heavily. However, nothing happened immediately after it touched the ground. But a second later, dozens of cracks spread out from the fist, extending to a range of 5 or 6 meters. White light flashed in those cracks, as if light was about to burst out from the cracks. Boom. All the cracks exploded, and all the rocks flew out. There was already a big pit under Millicent's feet. All this was under Li Ming's keen eyes. After the metal fist hit the target, the energy would be injected into the attacked target, and then the explosion effect would occur. When he thought that all this was over, there was a sudden shaking under him. Li Ming also realized it later and quickly stood up and flew into the air. Hoo-la la. The whole mountain actually broke and shattered directly, and the mountain body turned into rubble and fell downwards, causing the teleportation array in the mountain body to be instantly submerged by huge rocks. Seeing this scene, everyone present was already dumbfounded. This kind of attack was not a tentative attack. Once it hit, it would be devastating. At this moment, Robertson suddenly looked at Trade with a fierce look and shouted angrily, Trade, you actually attacked the ally. I'm going to tell Commander Abel. As soon as she finished speaking, Millicent's eyes suddenly turned, and her cold eyes immediately looked at Robertson. Along with that look, the corners of her mouth twitched slightly, and she said fiercely, you want to tell Abel, right? Robertson shrank slightly when he saw Millicent's eyes, and his face showed fear. Looking at the other party's ferocious expression, Robertson's forehead immediately flowed with beads of sweat the size of beans. Swoosh! The figure suddenly flashed, and Millicent disappeared on the spot. After a blink of an eye, Millicent's figure reappeared in front of Robertson. The clenched fist went straight to Robertson's head. Before her fist could get close, a golden light suddenly flashed, and with a muffled bang, Millicent's fist hit a golden wall, and Li Ming was behind the golden wall. The golden wall was thick and huge, and it was Li Ming's magic shield, but under Millicent's fist, cracks suddenly appeared on the golden wall, just like the ground that was hit by Millicent's fist just now. A second later, with a muffled bang, the golden wall shattered, and turned into starlight, and disappeared in the air. At this time, Millicent still had a proud look, with the corners of her mouth slightly raised. She looked at Li Ming coldly and said, "You were very proud that day, weren't you? Now, As she spoke, she swung her fist again and smashed it towards Li Ming's head. Li Ming's right hand suddenly raised violently, with 5 fingers spread out, and grabbed the opponent's fist. Bang! Li Ming's palm tightly grasped the opponent's fist, and at this moment, a powerful energy spread out from the arms of both of them. The energy did not spread out in a ripple way, but in arcs. It was as if the palm and fist were generators, and the arcs spread out from them. The energy of each arc was generated by the collision of the palm and fist, and its power was so great that the surrounding space was about to be torn apart. Faced with such a situation, Robertson and others could only avoid it from a distance, fearing that they would be affected. At this time, Millicent was already gritting her teeth, and the power of her fist had naturally been used to the limit, just like a person who had used all his strength. Li Ming was still calm, looking at the other party with contempt, and said, "I was just joking with you, and you still remember me until now. You are really petty. It's okay to have a bad temper, but you don't have those 2 tricks. It's really self-humiliation." At this time, Millicent seemed to have noticed something, and her face had become a little ugly. Li Ming's right hand suddenly exerted a little force, and a crunching sound was heard, and several cracks appeared on the surface of Millicent's metal fist. What? Millicent was secretly surprised, and her eyes turned, and looked at her right hand, and she said to herself, "This boxing glove is comparable to Liu Shan's weapon. It was broken by this guy." Just as she was thinking, Li Ming suddenly exerted force again. Snap! The metal boxing glove was completely broken, and at the same time, Li Ming's palm tightly grasped the fist inside the boxing glove. Almost at the same time, white light flashed in Li Ming's palm. After a bang sound, blood and flesh splattered in the light, and Millicent's entire arm disappeared. Without waiting for the other party to react, the white light on Li Ming's right hand suddenly extended several meters long, like a fluorescent stick, and at the moment the light column was formed, Li Ming's arm swung horizontally, and the action was like waving a long sword. The light column quickly passed through Millicent's body. It was a quick and clean strike, but this strike also shocked everyone who saw it. They were dumbfounded, and their bodies stiffened. "I actually really killed her." Robertson was the first to show a look of horror. At this time, Millicent was falling rapidly to the ground, and she was already dead. Looking at her falling body, Li Ming's eyes suddenly turned slightly, and looked at Winslow. Instant light slash, Li Ming's figure moved and disappeared from the sight of these people. When Li Ming's figure appeared again, he was already more than 10 meters behind Winslow. The light blade in his hand was now smaller, but Winslow was no longer moving. The body that was originally floating in the air suddenly fell down, and fell to the ground like a free fall. Chapter 327 Who set off the firecrackers? Exclamation mark. The air seemed to have solidified, and everyone could not breathe. They could only stay where they were, looking at Li Ming with trembling eyes, and then shivering. Li Ming clenched his right hand, and the white light turned into starlight and disappeared directly, but Li Ming's eyeballs suddenly turned in his eye sockets, and looked at Trade not far away. Just by being looked at by Li Ming, Trade's body suddenly shook, and he trembled slightly, as if he had been electrocuted. He gritted his teeth fiercely, and turned his figure violently, intending to fly away from here, but his thoughts had already been seen by Li Ming. The golden arc in his right hand suddenly shone brightly, and he aimed at Trade and threw it. Bang! The golden light flashed, and the dazzling white light suddenly shone blindingly, and everything in front of him was blank. After 2 seconds, Trade's figure had completely disappeared. killing the same level in seconds, killing the 1.1 level civilization. The means were sharp, and the strength was amazing. Among the middle level civilizations, except for the silicon-based life, there is no such anomaly in other advanced civilizations. Robertson stared at Li Ming with his eyes wide open. His floating figure had unknowingly come to Delx's side. Delx's face was solemn, and he couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. We have attracted some kind of monster," Robertson said tremblingly. Delx's face was even paler. His trembling eyes were full of fear, his mouth slightly opened, and he said, "Will he kill us too?" As soon as he said this, Robertson suddenly turned his eyes to Delx's face, and his livid face suddenly became silent. Just as the two were whispering, Li Ming's figure suddenly turned and looked at the two. When they were seen by Li Ming's eyes, they shuddered and couldn't say a word. But the next moment, Li Ming smiled slightly and said, "Okay, it's important to find Han Ren, so let's act separately." With that, Li Ming flew away into the distance without paying too much attention to the two. Looking at Li Ming's figure gradually going away, the two breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. I'm scared to death." Delx couldn't help but raise his hand to wipe the sweat from his forehead. Robson also took a long breath, looked at the direction completely opposite to Li Ming, and said, "Let's go this way." The direction Li Ming was heading was exactly the forest and the light in the distance. The light was very conspicuous under the night sky, and Li Ming was attracted from the first sight, so he wanted to see what was going on. The figure was flying in the air. To get there, he had to fly over a forest first. In the night sky, the forest was dark, and there were all some big trees that Li Ming had never seen before. Li Ming didn't look at the details of these trees, but when flying, he could always feel the movement inside. This movement was very strange, as if every big tree below would breathe, and their branches and leaves would occasionally sway, as if waving their arms. Li Ming gradually pulled his figure up high to stay away from the strange trees below. After all, it was better to be careful on this strange planet. Flying over the dark forest, Li Ming was getting closer to the lights. He lowered his body a little bit and looked around with his eyes slightly narrowed. At this time, the situation on the ground was very clear. Those so-called luminous bodies were just large pieces of rocks. These rocks were relatively dense and in large pieces. Almost all of them were of this type within a few hundred meters. The rocks did not look hard, as if they were formed by the accumulation of particles. The luminous particles were those particles, but some were brighter and some were darker, so it seemed that some places were shining and some places were still dark. However, Li Ming did not sense any energy from these substances, so he could only shake his head slightly. After looking at them, he continued to fly deeper along this area. After 100 meters, a small hill appeared in front of him. This hill was only a few dozen meters high and looked the same as those rocks. The difference was that there was a hole in the middle of the hill, and it made a whoosh sound. This sound was very rhythmic, just like human breathing, and the mountain pass was also experiencing the same signs as breathing. Sometimes a large amount of gas was inhaled, and sometimes a large amount of gas was ejected. The difference was that every time the gas was ejected, it brought some dust and debris, just like a crater. Li Ming couldn't help but feel curious. He moved his body and flew closer. At this time, Li Ming could see clearly that the hole sucked in gas, but exhaled much more debris than what he had seen just now. However, when exhaling, a large amount of powder rushed directly into the sky, and it was impossible to see clearly in the night sky. All the eyes could see were those slightly larger particles. The small particles floated with the wind and finally formed the large rocks around. Although the rocks did not contain energy, the exhaled gas carried a lot of energy, which made Li Ming frown. Is there something rich in energy in this cave? Muttering so in his mouth, Li Ming did not approach rashly. After all, the gas that went in and out was extremely powerful and very strange, so he had to be careful. Thinking in his mind, Li Ming raised his right hand gently, and at the same time, a golden arc flashed on his palm, and the sound of crackling was endless. He stared at the hill in front of him, hummed softly, and said to himself, "Then blow it up, and see what's going on." As he said this, the arc in his right hand suddenly flashed and changed, forming a giant arc as thick as an arm, 1 or 2 meters long. He aimed at the waist of the mountain, and suddenly swung it. bang, boom. Two loud noises were accompanied by white light spreading out. The mountaintop dozens of meters high was instantly destroyed by this lightning, and ashes and debris flew all over the sky. There was no shadow of the mountain in the floating smoke and dust. At the same time, the hole that was constantly inhaling and exhaling seemed to have stopped. He could not see the flow of gas in and out, which made Li Ming feel a little confused. The dust fell little by little, and Li Ming's slightly narrowed eyes kept looking at the ruins. Just as he was about to get closer to see what was going on, the ground suddenly shook, as if there was an earthquake. Although Li Ming was in the air, the strong vibration of the ground was particularly clear to Li Ming's consciousness. His body slowly rose into the air, his eyes slightly widened, and he frowned and looked down. At this time, the shaking ground was like the surface of the water, constantly fluctuating back and forth, ups and downs, causing a large number of cracks on the entire ground. The rocks in the surface of the ground were shattered and rolled, as if something was about to come out from the ground. Just as Li Ming was looking at this strange phenomenon in astonishment, a black shadow suddenly cast over. The black shadow rose from the ground in front of Li Ming, round and large, blocking the light of the starry sky. At the same time, the black shadow swallowed Li Ming, making the place where Li Ming was instantly darker. His eyes could not help but lift up, leaving the ground below, and looking in front of him. He saw that the cave entrance that was constantly breathing just now had stood up. Li Ming was immediately shocked. His eyes continued to look at the front, but his body could not stop floating to the distance behind him. Not only the cave entrance, but also the glowing rock ground slowly stood up. At this time, a huge outline had appeared. It turned out that the rock area where Li Ming had just stood was actually the chest of a giant, and the mouth of the giant was the mouth of the giant. As the giant stood up, the broken rocks and dust kept sliding down. The original surface of the giant gradually became clear. The skin under the dust and rocks turned out to be pieces of crystals, and they were dark red crystals, like a layer of armor. It looked very hard. The giant's appearance was similar to that of a human, with a round head and a hard body, 2 arms and 2 legs, but only 4 fingers on the palms and feet. After the giant stood up completely, it was 1,000 meters high. Even Li Ming, who was in the air, could only reach the belly of the giant. If he wanted to see the face of the giant, he could only slowly increase his height and look up at the other party. At this time, the soil and rocks on the giant's body had basically fallen off. Only the outer edge of the mouth still had a circle of granular rocks, and there was also a crack on the lips, as if it had been cut by a sharp weapon. A pair of crystal-like eyes looked around and finally saw Li Ming. He raised a big hand to wipe the rock particles from his mouth, and said, "Who just set off the firecrackers?" Firecrackers? Li Ming was also confused, but after thinking about it for a while, he was stunned. Could it be that when he used lightning to blow up the mountain earlier? Chapter 328, Strange Lake. As the giant spoke and breathed, dust and debris continued to spit out of his mouth, but at this time, he looked at Li Ming with a bit of displeasure. "It seems that the person who woke me up is you." After the giant's eyes turned for a while, they locked onto Li Ming. As he spoke, the breath of anger had already overflowed from his body. Li Ming frowned slightly, and after concentrating on the giant for a few times, he suddenly turned around and flew away. The giant in front of him was extraordinary. Judging from its body surface features, it was a silicon-based life. Li Ming didn't know that such a creature existed on Hangyu Star before. If he really had to fight it to the death, Li Ming would not be afraid, but after all, there was no need. Finding Hangren was naturally more important. When the giant saw Li Ming preparing to fly away, he suddenly raised his foot and chased after him. The giant was extremely huge, and every step he took was earth-shaking. At the same time, the distance of his steps was also very far, and Li Ming's flying speed was naturally not enough. As soon as it was within reach, the giant's hands began to wave, as if catching a bug. The giant waved his left hand and clapped his right hand, rising and falling, just to catch Li Ming. But the giant's attack speed was obviously much slower, and coupled with Li Ming's predictive ability, it was almost impossible to catch Li Ming easily. But in this way, it was naturally impossible for Li Ming to get rid of this giant, which was naturally very disadvantageous to Li Ming. Damn, it's really bad luck. I didn't find Han Ren, but met such a guy. Li Ming complained irritably. While dodging the giant's attack, he was thinking about how to dodge. Li Ming didn't want to be in a stalemate with this big guy. The most important thing was to find Han Ren as much as possible. Boom. Boom. Two loud noises like earthquakes were close to his ears. The giant chased closer and even raised his leg to step on Li Ming. If he was stepped on, he would definitely die. Even if he was not stepped on, he would still feel the shaking of the earth. After raising the flying height, the giant immediately used his hands. After lowering the flying height, the giant began to use his feet again, chasing and running all the way. Before he knew it, Li Ming had arrived at the forest he had been in before. Li Ming did not want to enter this strange forest, as the gloomy atmosphere inside seemed to hide other dangers. But looking at the giant behind him, Li Ming was in trouble again. After thinking for a while, Li Ming suddenly became excited, as if he had suddenly thought of something. That's right. I can use that ability. As he said this to himself, Li Ming smiled slightly, and at the same time, he had secretly activated his energy. After flying for a while, Li Ming's body suddenly paused and stopped, standing still in the air, as if he had given up on escaping. The giant was also startled when he saw this, but after pausing for only a second, his eyes showed a fierce look, and he waved his palm and slapped it directly. Before the huge palm came close, the strong wind under the palm was already approaching. Boom. Dust flew, the ground trembled, the giant's palm hit the ground directly from the air. Such a huge force made the dust on the ground block the view, and Li Ming's figure disappeared. The giant took his palm away, and there was a huge handprint on the ground, but there was no figure of Li Ming, and there was dust flying around the handprint. This made the giant stunned and uttered a sound of "ha." But the next moment, two figures suddenly jumped out of the smoke and dust, one to the left and the other to the right, flying quickly. These two figures are exactly the same, and they are all Li Ming. Such a scene suddenly appeared, and the giant was also confused. His eyes looked to the left and the right for a while, but he did not dare to hesitate any longer, because the two Li Mings were gradually going away. He moved his body and chased directly to the right. These two Li Mings were created by Li Ming using his newly learned ability, the elemental clone, to create another self using his own energy. The use of this ability is very unique, but it depends on how much energy is used on the clone. The more energy used, the stronger the clone will be, and the greater the effect on Li Ming. In order to avoid this giant, Li Ming used a lot of energy in this clone, so that he could hold the opponent for a longer time, giving the main body more time to escape. At this moment, a big thing was happening at the Alliance headquarters on Isaiah. In an ordinary conference room, 3 aliens were sitting around this meteorite table. These 3 people were the Isaiah Abel, the silver alien Xenia, and the black alien Yeager. Commander Abel, did you receive that message? Xenia asked cautiously with a nervous expression. Yabarol had a serious expression, nodded slightly, and said, "The Croft prison star system has been reported to me, but unfortunately, the Tillmans have already taken that guy to Ruby Star." Having said that, Yabarol's eyes turned slightly, and he glanced at the 2 people in front of him, and said, "How many star systems have entered Ruby Star now?" Zenny quickly replied, "In addition to the Tillmans and Ennas, 3 other star systems have entered Ruby Star. A total of 5 star systems have entered it, and this time, the Heth Alliance has also been dispatched for the Ruby Star plan. It is said that 5 star systems have also entered Ruby Star." Zenny continued. Yaba still nodded slightly, but his expression was particularly serious. He looked into the distance with a firm look, as if thinking about something. After a moment, he said, "Before we find Han Ren, don't worry about the Huff Alliance for the time being. You must give priority to finding Han Ren this time. As for that guy, I will deal with him personally. I must not let him leak the secret of the Croft Galaxy." Yeager nodded even more when he heard this, and said, "We will naturally feel relieved if you do it yourself. After all, if the secret of the Croft Galaxy is known to other alliances, we will be passive." Yaba nodded gently, looking into the distance with deep eyes, and cold light flashed in his eyes. After slowly getting up, he said, "Let's act." At this time on the Ruby Star, Li Ming came to a huge lake. The lake was surrounded by wild grass. One side corresponded to the starry sky, and the other side was close to the mountain. Under the starlight, the shadow of the mountain was reflected in the water, and it rippled slightly with the ripples on the water. Li Ming stood on the shore far away from the river, looking at the entire lake with his eyes. Under his wisdom eyes, there were black objects swimming around in the lake, like fish, but Li Ming could not see the true appearance of these creatures. He could only see the energy in these creatures. Li Ming came here because he was attracted by the flowing energy, but he found out that these were just some energy-rich creatures. Disappointment appeared on his face, but Li Ming did not go anywhere else. He had roughly checked the surrounding environment. There were several mountains on the other side of the lake, and there were several small woods in Li Ming's direction. It was not very clear under the night sky, but Li Ming had a new plan. He opened his right hand slightly, and his palm was beating slightly. A small green dragon circled and flew out. No matter what the surrounding situation was, using a flying dragon to explore was naturally the best and safest way. More importantly, the flying dragon was in a phantom state and was not subject to any geographical restrictions. The flying dragon flew out, and Li Ming sat on the ground, letting go of all his spiritual civilization consciousness, and then narrowed his eyes and began to sense what the flying dragon saw. With Li Ming's position as the center, the flying dragon spreads in circles around, sometimes in the mountains, sometimes on the ground of the plain, and sometimes in the woods. The flight trajectory expands in circles, and all the detailed places are explored by Li Ming little by little. The methods and ways have not changed at all. In Li Ming's cognition, everything with energy must be carefully checked. Time passed little by little, and the flying dragon did not stop at all, but the exploration distance of the flying dragon was also limited. Once a certain limit distance was reached, it could not continue to explore. And this exploration has been continuing. On the dark red jade star, the flying dragon is like a green worm, constantly shuttling. All the places around have basically been mastered by Li Ming, but the results of the exploration still disappoint Li Ming. There is no energy-rich thing in this area. This is undoubtedly the most disappointing. Li Ming's eyes, which have been slightly closed, slowly opened at this time. After sighing, he said, "There is nothing." He couldn't help shaking his head slightly while talking to himself. Just as he was about to leave in disappointment, Li Ming's eyes stopped on the lake again. Those creatures with energy were still swimming around, but this also attracted Li Ming's attention again. Chapter 329, U-Energy. Staring at the lake, Li Ming sensed a strange aura, and his eyebrows twitched slightly. The flying dragon, which was originally returning, seemed to have received some orders. It turned in the air and quickly entered the lake and disappeared. As soon as the flying dragon entered the water, a strange energy approached. Li Ming was surprised that the lake water also had energy, but the energy of the lake water was very weak and not very useful. The flying dragon began to shuttle in the water and approach the bottom of the lake little by little. At this time, the energy-rich creatures in the lake became clear. These creatures did not look like fish, but like tadpoles, with limbs, but the tail had not yet degenerated, and the body surface was dark black, like some kind of crystal block. As the flying dragon continued to approach the bottom of the lake, the number of these things increased. Even if you didn't look closely, you could clearly perceive the various details on the body of this thing. Each one was more than 1 meter long, with a hard crystal surface, which looked very smooth. It had no eyes, but a mouth full of sharp teeth. From the information in the animal illustrations, Li Ming learned that this beast was called Shell Beast, a group beast with extremely strong attack power, and was a wild beast. However, these shell beasts seemed to have changed slightly, as if they had mutated. Before the flying dragon approached the bottom of the water, Li Ming did not take this lake seriously at all. At most, there were some creatures with energy in the water. However, as the flying dragon went deeper, Li Ming's face became extremely ugly. Because the bottom of the lake was already densely packed with these monsters, the number was unimaginable. These things had no effect on the flying dragon's exploration. The flying dragon in the form of a phantom could quickly pass through all of this. Through continuous infiltration, the flying dragon finally approached the bottom of the lake, and a strange phenomenon occurred. A large number of shell beasts only swam in the water layer 4 or 5 meters away from the bottom of the lake, and none of them approached the bottom of the lake. The bottom of the lake here was also unusual. It was not sand, stone, or soil, but a dark red, like a huge dark red floor tile. As the flying dragon continued to approach, the energy information became clearer and clearer. Li Ming on the shore frowned, his face showing surprise, and whispered, "This energy is U energy. U energy, a kind of energy, is produced on a special planet. This energy is not common, but relatively rare. It is one of the more precious resources. This energy is applicable to all civilizations, but it is most helpful to power civilization and silicon-based life. Because this energy can strengthen the body, the effect is excellent, but it is not easy to be absorbed by the body. It needs to be configured with fixed materials and refined before it can be better absorbed by the body. Its effect is dozens or even hundreds of times stronger than the secret barrier pill, but it needs to be refined. It is precisely because of this special effect that U energy is more suitable for power civilization. As for silicon-based life, this life form itself is stronger than carbon-based life, so the effect of using U energy is also relatively large. Seeing such a huge amount of U energy at the bottom of the lake, how could Li Ming not be tempted? Although Li Ming is not a power civilization, he needs to continuously strengthen his physique in his multi-civilization situation, so U energy is even more important to Li Ming. Li Ming opened his eyes slightly and began to think. With so many shell beasts, how can I get the U energy? Li Ming's right hand unconsciously touched his chin, and his eyes looked back and forth on the water surface. Although he was strong enough, it was still extremely dangerous to face such a huge number of shell beasts. Thinking about it, Li Ming thought of a way. He rolled his eyes and stared at the shell beasts swimming in the water, thinking to himself, using camouflage potion should not be discovered. Li Ming muttered in his mouth, but he was not sure. However, judging from the current situation, this is indeed the only way. Thinking of this, Li Ming stood up. He raised his right hand slightly, and the golden arc in his palm began to jump. His slightly narrowed eyes gradually locked onto a shell beast under the water like a radar. Seeing the right time, he swung his right hand violently. Bang! The golden arc flew out of his hand, and with a loud bang, it was as if a mine exploded underwater. The water column was stirred up more than 10 meters high, and the entire nearby water area was stirred up with huge waves, and the water ripples followed. After a few seconds, all the water in the sky fell back into the water, and Li Ming's right hand waved again, and the green light shadow hand stretched out, extended to the water surface, grabbed it hard, and quickly retracted it. With a pop sound, a dead shell beast fell on the ground in front of Li Ming. The beast's body had been severely ruptured by Li Ming's arc, and blood was constantly flowing out of it. Li Ming reached down with his right hand, and the green light shadow completely wrapped the beast, and the blood slowly rose along the green light. It gathered in the palm of his hand little by little. After a few seconds, the green light disappeared, and a blood ball appeared in Li Ming's palm. Then his left hand opened slightly, and a bottle of camouflage potion appeared. His eyes swept back and forth between the blood clot and the potion, and his right hand slowly held the blood clot to the top of the potion. His palm tilted slightly, and the blood clot entered the medicine bottle little by little like quicksand. Regarding this camouflage potion, Li Ming had actually just found some clues from the Tillman Inheritance Star Book. According to the Tillman People's Inheritance Star Book, Li Ming learned that the original ability of the camouflage potion was magic shadow incarnation. As long as the eyes can capture the full perspective of a certain creature, then you can use this ability to control energy to change your appearance. However, you cannot change the size of your body. You can only make your appearance exactly the same as the species you imitate, but the camouflage potion is different. Through the ability of the drug, you can completely change the body structure. Not only the appearance is the same, but also the size is the same. The advantage of the magic shadow incarnation is that it can be controlled at will. You can transform into any species you want, and you can also transform back at any time, but it consumes a certain amount of energy. The camouflage potion cannot control the time of transformation after transformation, and you need to wait until the effect of the drug ends. The magic shadow incarnation Li Ming has not mastered this ability yet, but if you want to completely conceal the truth, the camouflage potion is a very good choice. Holding the medicine bottle in his left hand, he kept shaking it. After using it several times, Li Ming could already grasp the approximate time through the dosage. He had a rough idea of how long he could last with the amount of medicine. After the configuration was completed, Li Ming raised the medicine bottle, smiled slightly, pinched his nose with his right hand, and drank it down like drinking water. A few seconds after drinking this, Li Ming's body surface began to change, and his body was also twisted and deformed. After a while, Li Ming had completely disappeared, and only a shell beast appeared on the ground. The limbs crawled slowly, heading straight for the water, passing through the weeds by the lake, and after hesitating for a while, it jumped into it with a plop. Shell beasts have no eyes, and rely entirely on perception, but Li Ming, who has been transformed, is completely different. He looks the same as other shell beasts, but Li Ming, who has a flying dragon, has no vision affected by anything. At the same time, Li Ming's powerful mental power can also clearly sense everything he wants to sense. Li Ming did not dive into the water immediately. He first swam slowly near the water surface. There were relatively few shell beasts near the water surface. Li Ming needed to test the results and safety of his transformation first. After swimming slowly around the lake surface and shuttling back and forth among the shell beasts for a while, Li Ming was relieved. Even if he deliberately passed by other shell beasts, he would not be attacked. Obviously, his transformation was very successful. Since it was safe, Li Ming prepared for the next step, diving to the bottom of the lake and collecting new energy. But just as Li Ming was about to dive into the water, an alien suddenly flew in from the sky above the lake. The alien stopped at a height of several dozen meters above the lake surface and looked around the lake carefully with his eyes. Finally, his eyes sank and looked at the lake surface. This person's head was like a bear, but without hair, with a slender body, more than 2 meters tall, and stopped at the lake surface at this moment, not knowing what he was thinking. Li Ming's flying dragon had already taken all of this person in his sight. According to what Li Ming had learned from Robson's brain, there were no aliens of this appearance in the 11 star systems of the Hawaii Alliance. If he was not from the Hawaii Alliance, where did this alien come from? What was his purpose in coming here? Chapter 330, A Rich Harvest. Under Phi Lang's observation, the detailed information of this person also emerged bit by bit. This person's name is Biggs, from the He-Fu Alliance. Li Ming had heard of it before. The He-Fu Alliance is a large alliance, composed of 5 galaxies, and its strength is also very strong. And the purpose of this person coming here is also for you energy. After Biggs determined the environment, he suddenly activated the energy, and his body surface was suddenly wrapped in blue light. Under the blue light, it seemed that Biggs was a luminous body, which was extremely subtle in the night sky. But after a few seconds, Biggs's figure slowly shrank with the blue light, and finally turned into a shell beast. Seeing this scene, Li Ming's heart directly let out a fuck. Li Ming needed camouflage potion to assist in his transformation, but this alien actually turned into a shell beast directly, and the size was basically the same, which made Li Ming both shocked and curious. What civilization is this guy? How can he have this ability? Li Ming looked stunned, and even a little bit unbelievable. If the other party is an intelligent civilization, then the star class they practiced must be a high-level star class that Li Ming could not reach. If the other party is another civilization, then what civilization would have such a special and powerful ability? Li Ming was puzzled, but at this time Biggs had fallen from the sky, and after a plop sound, he fell into the lake. Li Ming saw the other party's position, and swam over directly. On the one hand, he was curious, and on the other hand, Li Ming wanted to see what kind of guy this was. From the outside, the shell beast that Biggs transformed into was no different from other shell beasts, almost exactly the same, but Li Ming could clearly identify the other party's identity from many shell beasts with his strong mental power, so it was very smooth to follow the other party. Biggs's goal was very clear, and he went straight to the bottom of the lake. Li Ming followed closely behind. In a moment, the shell beasts transformed by the two came to the dense area of shell beasts near the bottom of the lake. The number of shell beasts here was like ants, densely packed, one next to another, just like squeezing in a crowd. After passing through the densely populated area, you will reach the bottom of the lake. There is no shell beast here. It is part of the lake bottom, and is very quiet. You can only sense the faintly glowing U energy at the bottom of the lake. As soon as Biggs reached the bottom of the lake, he reached out with his right hand and took out a silver sphere. The surface of this sphere is round and smooth. It is a technological product. Once it touches the luminous body at the bottom of the lake, it begins to absorb U energy. U energy is not all over the bottom of the lake, but in patches. It is like a neon light on the bottom of the lake. The glowing places are U energy, and the non-luminous places are ordinary rocks. The metal ball placed by Biggs is very strange, and the speed of absorbing energy is also very fast. From the moment the metal ball was placed, the faint light began to flash, sometimes dark and sometimes bright, which is absorbing U energy. This absorption speed is much faster than Li Ming's star furnace. Seeing this scene, Li Ming frowned slightly. However, after using Feelang to sense it, Li Ming also understood that this metal ball was specially made by the He-Fu lands to collect U energy, so it is extremely powerful. After placing the metal ball, Biggs did not hesitate at all and swam quickly along the bottom of the lake and left. Li Ming hesitated for a moment and then followed him again. A few seconds later, Biggs came to another U energy site and then placed another metal ball there. After confirming that the metal ball began to absorb energy, Biggs quickly left again. Li Ming continued to follow, but at this time, Li Ming had already understood that Biggs was constantly placing the metal ball in order to collect all the U energy at the same time. Li Ming was also stunned while following and thought to himself, damn. Okay. This is well prepared and professional. After placing dozens of them in a row, the entire bottom of the lake was basically covered with these metal balls, and the pieces of U energy were also being absorbed quickly. After doing all this, Biggs' body flashed blue light again, forcing Biggs to swim quickly to the surface of the water. Li Ming followed him from beginning to end, and only stopped when he followed him to the surface of the water. As soon as he reached the surface, the blue light on Biggs' body became brighter, and his body shape was also changing. His body had not completely left the water when it returned to its original appearance. At this time, Biggs was panting, his face was pale, and he seemed very weak. Through the flying dragon Li Ming, he could see that the illusion ability used by Biggs seemed to consume a lot of energy, which also caused him to be unable to hold on for too long. Biggs, who flew out of the water, quickly came to the grass on the shore of the lake, found a secluded place, and leaned over to sit down, urgently took out a pill, and put it in his mouth to swallow, then closed his eyes and concentrated, just to restore his body's energy. Li Ming's illusionary shell beast slowly emerged from the water, and sensed the other part his body, but after only 1 or 2 seconds, Li Ming turned his head, and returned to the water. The flying dragon continued to secretly monitor the other party on the water surface, and Li Ming twisted his body and came to the bottom of the lake again. Looking at the glowing U energy now, it is very different from before, because the U energy is absorbed quickly, which causes the area that was originally glowing to dim, as if the energy inside is about to be sucked dry. The metal balls on top are getting brighter and brighter, as if they are about to be fully absorbed. Li Ming smiled secretly when he saw this. Wait until these metal balls are absorbed, and I can just take them away, right? Whispering in his mind, Li Ming laughed even more. Time passed little by little, and Li Ming's figure swam back and forth at the bottom of the lake. Looking at those bright metal balls, Li Ming was full of satisfaction. His figure was like patrolling his orchard, and the time for a good harvest was about to come. At this moment, Biggs was still recovering energy in the grass on the shore, and had no idea of the situation below. After a while, the light at the bottom of the lake had disappeared little by little, like a lamp that suddenly went out, and the only thing left at the bottom of the lake were the shining beads, like pearls. Li Ming twisted his body excitedly and swam over, picking up the shining beads one by one, and putting them into the star capsule like picking mushrooms. This feeling was like picking up banknotes on the ground. The mood was naturally indescribable. Li Ming was enjoying the joy brought by the harvest. Biggs on the shore opened his eyes slightly, and his expression and complexion had recovered a lot. After a slight smile, he flew into the air, and then his body surface emitted blue light again, and began to transform. Biggs' every move was under Li Ming's surveillance. When Biggs transformed into a shell beast and fell into the water again, Li Ming had returned with a full load and a great harvest. With these harvests, Li Ming swam to the lake. Judging from the dosage of Li Ming's disguise potion, it would take some time for Li Ming to transform back to human form, so after swimming to the lake, he came to a secluded place by the lake and stopped. Now Li Ming Didn't have to do anything, just wait for the effect of the drug to end. At this time, Biggs had just swam to the bottom of the lake and used his familiar memory to find the places where the metal balls were placed. However, as soon as he approached, his whole body suddenly froze in place. The originally glowing U energy had turned black, just like ordinary rocks, but the metal balls he had placed were nowhere to be seen. Biggs was shocked, and with a swing of his tail, he began to search around. However, after sensing, he did not find the whereabouts of the metal ball. Biggs was dazed and hesitant in place, but after a few seconds, he moved and swam away. When he came to the next place where he had placed the metal ball, after checking it out, Biggs became even more panicked, and his head swam around, and he searched the area again with his flexible body. Why is it gone? Biggs did not dare to hesitate anymore, and his body began to swim quickly. This time, Biggs did not stop at all, and his body began to shuttle around the entire bottom of the lake, and those places where he had placed the metal balls before were checked one by one. After watching it, Biggs was completely stunned and seemed a little unwilling, but he paused for a few seconds and began to float back to the surface. As soon as he came out of the water, Biggs looked around carefully again, but after checking it out, he couldn't help but frowned and thought to himself, impossible. How could it suddenly disappear? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331, War is Inevitable. Biggs was reluctant to leave, but at this time, in a shallow water area at the edge of the lake, the body of the shell beast that Li Ming transformed into suddenly twisted. Feeling the changes in his body, Li Ming was shocked and said to himself, "Fuck, is it time?" As he spoke, the shell beast that Li Ming transformed into began to change rapidly, and white light flashed. After a few seconds, Li Ming returned to his human body. As soon as he changed back to his human body, Li Ming immediately entered the bushes, preparing to leave this place, but the white light that appeared when he transformed was extremely conspicuous in the night sky. Although Biggs did not see Li Ming's figure, the white light also attracted Biggs' attention. He immediately looked over with a pair of eyes. With his concentration, he showed a look of surprise, and his figure began to slowly float over. Li Ming originally wanted to leave quietly, but it was obviously impossible. After sensing the figure of the other party coming, Li Ming moved his body and flew quickly to the distance. As soon as he saw a figure rushing out, Biggs immediately made a sound of "ha," and his figure suddenly accelerated and chased in the direction where Li Ming fled. Li Ming used the fastest flying speed. If he could get rid of the other party just like that, there would be no need to fight. After all, Li Ming did not want to have any entanglement with other aliens for the time being. In terms of Li Ming's own energy body, ordinary first level civilizations could not compare with Li Ming, whether in attack or flying speed, but the alien behind him was obviously extraordinary. Under Li Ming's full strength, the other party was not only not thrown away, but also pulled closer to Li Ming. This made Li Ming startled and puzzled. This Biggs belongs to the 1.1 level civilization. It is true that he is one level higher than Li Ming, but his energy body is definitely not as good as Li Ming, because Li Ming has 3 times the energy body of the first level civilization. The first level civilization is also divided into 3 intervals. That is, the first level civilization to the 1.3 level civilization is an interval. In the same interval, the strength can only be compared with the volume of one's own energy, or the star civilization, etc. Since it is the same interval, and the other party's energy volume is not as good as his, why is the speed so fast? Looking at the other party's figure gradually pulling closer, Li Ming's head turned slightly, and his slightly narrowed eyes kept looking at the other party. Hiss. Li Ming took a deep breath, and then he could see clearly that there was a pair of wings on the opponent's back. What the hell is that wing? Li Ming was secretly surprised, not knowing the reason. Among the civilizations that Li Ming knew, he could not remember any civilization with wings. The wings were not big, with a wingspan of less than 2 meters, but under the propulsion of the wings, the speed of this person's movement was extraordinary. This forced Li Ming to rethink his countermeasures. At this time, Li Ming was far away from the lake, and under him was already a desert mountain area. In the darkness, there was only the black rock and the grey ground. If he couldn't get rid of the opponent, he could only fight. Thinking of this in his mind, Li Ming's flying figure suddenly stopped. Biggs was not surprised by Li Ming's sudden stop, but he also stopped and stopped not far away from Li Ming, with a fierce look in his eyes, and first looked Li Ming up and down. It looks like it's someone from the Huai Alliance. He looked at Li Ming with contempt and said coldly. Li Ming said nothing, and looked back at the other party. With his wisdom eyes, he wanted to see the other party's true identity and origin. After all, only after understanding the other party's civilization foundation can Li Ming defeat the enemy more steadily. Seeing that Li Ming did not reply, Biggs did not care. He just opened his eyes slightly, and a fierce and cold look was revealed. He asked again, "What were you doing by the lake just now? Did you take the energy bead?" Li Ming still did not reply, but frowned. Li Ming's wisdom eyes could not see the civilization of the other party, and he could not find any clues. It can be said that Li Ming had no way of knowing what kind of civilization the other party belonged to. This strange phenomenon was very unfavorable to Li Ming, and it was even more difficult to deal with. Li Ming was puzzled, but Biggs seemed to have lost his patience. He snorted coldly and said, "Whether it's you or not, since I've met you, then you are done for." As he spoke, he waved his right hand and suddenly a white bead appeared in his hand. The bead was transparent, slightly larger than a basketball, and looked like a bright moon. However, as soon as it appeared, a pattern suddenly appeared in the center of the white sphere. This pattern was exactly the pattern of a certain beast tribe. Biggs' eyes flashed coldly, and the bead in his hand lit up. The wild beast pattern on it suddenly moved slightly, and then with a whoosh, the wild beast that was originally in the bead actually jumped out. As soon as the wild beast jumped out of the bead, its body quickly grew larger, and almost in an instant it became 5 or 6 meters long. This beast looked like a cat, but its body was not flesh, but a phantom. It was white in color, and electric arcs kept jumping on its surface. Li Ming frowned, looked at the bead, then looked at the white cat beast. His face changed slightly. The bead had a very strange aura, even a little bit similar to Nito, although Li Ming had a general understanding of the existence of the artifact, but Li Ming had never seen anyone with a divine artifact. He just felt that the bead in the other person's hand was somewhat similar to the divine artifact. Looking at it like this, he couldn't help but think in his heart, the aura of that thing. It can't really be a divine artifact, but this aura. As he said this in secret, golden mist began to spread on the surface of Li Ming's body, which was the magic shield. The golden mist continued to emerge from Li Ming's body and then spread to the surroundings, wrapping Li Ming's body in it, and Li Ming's left and right hands were also changing. The left hand was jumping with golden electric light, and the right hand was glowing with a faint white halo. Biggs saw all these changes, but he didn't care. He pointed his left hand at Li Ming and lightly tapped him, as if he was giving an order, but he didn't say anything. After this gesture, the surface of the white cat beast suddenly lit up slightly, and the arc jumped more violently. Ah! A piercing scream came out, and a white light flashed in front of him. The white cat beast seemed to walk a gorgeous Z-shaped route in the air, like a white lightning straight in front of him. With the predictive ability of his wisdom eyes, Li Ming was prepared, and suddenly clenched his right hand tightly. The faint halo in the palm of his hand suddenly became dazzling. After the white light flashed, a 2-meter long lightsaber had formed. Facing the white cat beast rushing towards him, Li Ming had no intention of dodging. His expression suddenly tightened, and he swung his right hand and slashed it directly. The 2-meter long lightsaber moved with Li Ming's figure. The sword light flickered, and the light just flashed before his eyes. In just a moment, Li Ming's arms crisscrossed and slashed 3 times. The white cat beast that pounced at high speed seemed to be extremely fierce, but after a few slashes from Li Ming, its body stiffened in place, and the shadow was cut by Li Ming's lightsaber with 3 cuts, just like a piece of paper being cut in 3 places. The lightsaber is the ability that Li Ming learned from Tillman's inherited starbook. This sword can shorten or increase by controlling its own energy, but the shorter it is, the greater its power. Li Ming showed a slight smile on his face, and his eyes looked through the shadow of the white cat in front of him, and directly looked at Biggs in the distance. But Biggs looked calm and did not show any abnormality. Li Ming's slightly narrowed eyes suddenly blinked, and he immediately found something. Then he immediately looked at the phantom of the white cat in front of him. He saw that the beast did not break and dissipate. On the contrary, the gap cut by Li Ming had completely healed. The huge mouth opened and fiercely bit Li Ming. At this time, the distance between the beast and Li Ming was very close, and it was naturally too late to dodge. The arc of electricity in the mouth of the white cat beast jumped and kept hitting Li Ming. At the same time, the huge mouth also bit Li Ming. The huge mouth bit tightly, and the arc of electricity in the mouth kept hitting Li Ming. However, under the protection of the golden mist, these did not cause any harm to Li Ming. However, Li Ming was completely helpless at this time. He could only let the white cat beast bite him and fly around. From a distance, it seemed as if the white cat was biting a golden bead in its mouth. But despite this, Li Ming could not just let the beast do this. After all, the golden light magic shield was also consuming the body's energy. His eyes were wide, his teeth were clenched, and the golden light in his left hand was jumping more violently at this moment. He aimed at the beast and swung it fiercely. Boom. A violent vibration sound was heard, and a golden arc of electricity flashed out from the left hand, as if a super lightning bolt was released from Li Ming's left hand. The sound was deafening. The golden arc of electricity exploded instantly, and the white phantom cat beast dissipated, just like a gust of wind blowing away the smoke, and the phantom of the white cat disappeared at this moment. Chapter 332, Divine Artifact, The Illusion of the Hay. This time, the shadow of the white cat beast was completely shattered, and Li Ming's demeanor was restored a lot. He turned his eyes and looked at Biggs again. But Biggs was still calm, as if nothing had happened. Li Ming immediately realized something when he saw this, and moved his body and floated away. As his body drifted away from the original place little by little, Li Ming's muscles trembled slightly under his narrowed eyes, and the energy changes in the air appeared in his eyes. The white cat beast seemed to be shattered, but it did not disappear in the air like other energies, but condensed in the middle little by little. After a while, the white arc jumped again, and the white cat beast that was shattered by Li Ming before was formed again. But before the white cat beast was formed, Li Ming's eyes had already noticed the changes in Biggs' bead. Although this white cat beast flew out of the bead, the shadow of the white cat had always stayed in the bead. When Li Ming smashed the white cat in the bead in Biggs' hand would also break, but under the stimulation of the bead's energy, the broken white cat would reassemble again. Simply put, the cat in the bead and the cat in front of him are the same cat. No matter how Li Ming kills the cat in front of him, the cat in the bead will reassemble it again. Therefore, as long as the bead is still there, the cat in front of him is immortal. Thinking of this, Li Ming's eyes turned slightly and looked at the position where Biggs was. It seems that only by destroying the bead or killing Biggs can we get rid of the cat in front of us. Whispering secretly in his mouth, Li Ming's right hand tightened the lightsaber. At this time, the white cat beast had already formed, and its eyes flashing with electric light locked onto Li Ming at once. Its body flashed and rushed straight towards Li Ming. Li Ming ignored the cat, and his body suddenly moved, silently chanting, "Instant light slash." While his body disappeared from the original place, it appeared a few meters in front of Biggs, and at the same time, the lightsaber in his right hand swung out. But at the same time, when the lightsaber was slashed out, Li Ming was suddenly startled. His eyes had already seen something, but it was too late. He only heard a violent muffled sound of bang. Li Ming's lightsaber seemed to cut on an iron block. He only heard a buzzing and trembling sound, and a white shadow suddenly appeared. Biggs' entire figure was actually wrapped in a huge shadow sphere. The shadow sphere was white and transparent. The lightsaber was so powerful that it only left a scratch on the surface of the sphere. Before Li Ming could attack again, the white cat beast had already pounced on him again. At this time, Li Ming had no intention of attacking again. He flashed and retreated to a distance. However, the white cat beast did not stop at all. Seeing Li Ming evading, it continued to chase him. Li Ming's face changed slightly, and his left hand suddenly waved. A ball of golden mist rushed out from his palm. Facing the white cat beast rushing towards him, Li Ming suddenly stretched out his left hand. The gesture was like handing something over. The golden mist floated away along Li Ming's palm. After a while of rotation and entanglement, the long strip of mist bound the white cat beast in circles. Under the golden mist, the limbs and body of the white cat beast were completely bound, unable to move at all. Then, the golden mist condensed little by little, and turned into a golden chain. One end of the chain was in Li Ming's left hand, and the rest of the chain completely entangled the beast, as if Li Ming was holding a pet that was tied up, but this was only on the surface. The real Li Ming was not relaxed. He needed to keep injecting energy into the golden chain to ensure the restraint of the white cat beast. The white cat beast struggled desperately and kept making wow roars, but no matter how it twisted its body, it could not get rid of Li Ming's restraint. After confirming that the white cat beast could no longer move, Li Ming's eyes turned slightly and looked at Biggs again. At this time, Li Ming looked at this person differently from before. Li Ming's mind was mostly focused on the beads in the other person's hand. In the bead in Biggs's hand, the cat could not move either, but there was another image in the bead. That is, there was another Biggs in the bead, holding a bead in his hand. This was also the scene that Li Ming saw when he approached the opponent with the instant light slash. As for what Li Ming hit with the instant light slash, it was the phantom shield created by the bead. This was already the most terrifying. Biggs was holding a bead in his hand, and there was another Biggs holding a bead in the bead. If the white cat beast in front of him was used as a comparison, Biggs could not be killed now, and he could only destroy the bead. Li Ming's wise eyes stared at it, and his mind was constantly analyzing. Biggs looked at Li Ming indifferently, as if he had seen through Li Ming's intentions. He looked at Li Ming with his eyes, then looked at the bead in his hand, snorted, and said, "I can't see that you still have some tricks. But, in front of the artifact, Yihehu and Meng, it's still too fragile." Biggs continued. "Artifact, Yihei." Li Ming whispered. "Hey, the 12th on the 12 list of divine artifacts, ranked after Muxu." Just as Li Ming had guessed before, the artifact in Biggs's hand was really a divine artifact. This also explains why the other party can use such a strange ability. After a few seconds, the bead in Biggs's hand suddenly flashed, and the white cat beast inside disappeared. When the beast's shadow and the bead disappeared, the white cat beast outside that was bound by Li Ming's golden light chain also disappeared. As the white cat beast disappeared, the golden light chain in Li Ming's hand slowly retracted into Li Ming's body and disappeared. Biggs continued to look at Li Ming with his eyes, and couldn't help but sigh slightly, saying, "Your strength is not weak, but it's a pity that you are from the Hua Alliance, otherwise, I really want to let you go." As he said this, the bead in Biggs's hand also flashed and became brighter. Li Ming knew the power of the artifact. Seeing that the other party activated the artifact, he was naturally using some terrible ability. When he didn't understand the other party's artifact, Li Ming naturally couldn't use his own ability to resist. Thinking in his mind, Li Ming slowly raised his right hand, and a green light flashed in his hand. A small green bud appeared in his hand. This green bud was exactly what Li Ming picked from the netting. Big's eyes turned, and saw the green light in Li Ming's hand, but he didn't care. Instead, he snorted disdainfully, as if no matter what means Li Ming used, he couldn't compare with the artifact in his hand. The palm of his right hand flashed with light, and a large amount of energy had begun to activate the artifact, the illusion of the sea. Suddenly, the bead was shining brightly, but this light was not dazzling. It was like moonlight, showing a bit of haziness. As the light increased, the white cat beast appeared again in the bead. Li Ming continued to activate the green bud in his hand, and occasionally looked at the other party with his eyes, but he was a little surprised to see the white cat beast again. But the next moment, Li Ming's eyes widened a little, and he saw that the white bead illusion suddenly shone brightly, and the white cat beast quickly jumped out of it. There was only one in the illusion, but there were 7 in reality. In short, it was already very difficult for Li Ming to deal with one white cat beast before, and he finally relied on the golden chain of the magic shield to restrain it. But now 7 appeared at once, which was undoubtedly shocking. 7 unkillable phantom beasts would be very difficult for anyone. Seeing this scene, Li Ming was not overly panicked. After all, he was also using a divine weapon. He clenched his right hand hard, and the originally condensed green light bang scattered. The scattered green light did not disappear, but turned into a strip of green objects to wrap around his body. In a blink of an eye, Li Ming was completely wrapped by the green phantom, and at the same time, vines kept flying around. Looking at Li Ming at this time, he looked like a monster with countless tentacles, and the green vines swayed around, which was extremely weird. Seeing this scene, Biggs's face changed slightly, and he had already seen a hint of abnormality, and said to himself, that green thing is. It can be seen that it is unusual, but it cannot be guessed. He slowly raised his left hand, looked at Li Ming fiercely with cold eyes, and then pointed his left hand at Li Ming. As soon as this gesture was made, the 7 phantom white cat beasts rushed over. The 7 phantoms, like 7 lightning bolts, swept through the air, accompanied by the crackling sound of electric arcs, which was daunting. Chapter 333, Level 1 Wild Beast. Li Ming's eyes widened a little, and his black eyeballs turned into a green triangle. His expression tightened, and he shouted and rushed forward. Ah! With a roar, the white cat beast opened its mouth, and rushed towards Li Ming with a ferocious face, as if it wanted to tear Li Ming to pieces. However, before the cat got close, a green shadow vine on Li Ming's body suddenly swung out. Pa! The vine slammed directly on the cat's face, just like someone slapped it, but the force was extremely strong. Under the effect of the vine's force, the white cat beast flew, and hit another white cat beast that was about to pounce on it. The force of the two did not weaken at all after the collision. There was a flash of white light, and a loud boom sounded. A hilltop on the ground was directly smashed by the 2 white cat beasts that fell, and dust, smoke, sand, and stones flew everywhere. From a distance, it seemed that a tentacle on Li Ming's body slapped the 2 down. The remaining 5 did not stop at all, and continued to rush over. At this time, the tentacles on Li Ming's body also turned into multiple arms. There was a constant sound of pa pa pa. One by one, they were slapped to the ground, causing a constant boom sound from the ground. Seeing this scene, Biggs could no longer remain calm. His expression suddenly tensed up, and he thought to himself, could this be? Just as he thought of something in his mind, a green vine suddenly swung over, and a muffled bang sounded. Crackling. The white shadow ball wrapped around Biggs cracked with several cracks. Seeing this, Biggs couldn't help but look a little panic. The phantom light in his right hand lit up, and the white cat beasts that were originally slapped to the ground suddenly flashed, like 7 lightning bolts shooting up from the ground, and rushed straight to Li Ming in the air. Before the 7 white cat beasts really approached, the shadows of the vines on Li Ming's body stretched out straight, and turned into 7 sharp swords in an instant, piercing the flying white cat beasts one by one. Although the green shadow vines were slender, they were straight and hard. Piercing those white cat beasts was like piercing leaves with a needle, easy and natural. With this action, Biggs's face looked extremely ugly, and his face was also a little pale, as if he had consumed a lot of energy. However, Li Ming's complexion was also very ugly at this time. He gritted his teeth tightly, frowned, and looked at the other party with a fierce look, thinking to himself, using this ability of the artifact, it actually consumes so much energy. The consumption of energy is divided into real objects and shadows. Among them, the consumption of shadows is very huge, because the shadows are all formed by the gathering of one's own energy. Coupled with the intensity of the attack, the consumption of energy is even greater. It is obvious that the current level of civilization is still a bit reluctant to control the shadow ability of the artifact. This consumption is unbearable for both Li Ming and Biggs. It is naturally disadvantageous for both of them to continue to consume like this. At first, Biggs' energy was still able to operate with only 1 white cat beast, but now with 7 at once, it is inevitable that he is a little overwhelmed. And Li Ming is obviously still a little lacking in the use of the power of the artifact, so his grasp of the use of energy is still a little insufficient. After the 2 sides confronted each other for a few seconds, Biggs took the lead and slowly retreated. His figure drifted away, and at the same time, the light of the beads in his hand dimmed, and the 7 pierced white cat beasts also turned into stars and disappeared. Li Ming was slightly relieved when he saw this, and the extended vines were slowly retracted. The 2 people stared at each other, and their eyes were full of anger and murderous intent, as if they wanted to kill each other. Looking at each other, the figures of the two people began to slowly fall to the ground, and in the process of landing, the beads in Biggs's hand disappeared little by little, and the green light on Li Ming's body also disappeared little by little. The two sides coincidentally retracted the power of the artifact, and fell to the ground, just to reduce the consumption of energy. After a while, the two of them landed on a hilltop. Li Ming kept an eye on the other side, and took out several nebula pills, and swallowed them in one gulp. At this level, the effect of nebula pills was already insignificant, so he had to swallow several pills at once. Biggs also took out a pill, but did not swallow it immediately. Instead, he hesitated for a few seconds, before putting it into his mouth, as if he was reluctant to do so. After taking the pill, Biggs looked at Li Ming with even more anger, and said directly, as one of the three major fighters of the He-Fu Alliance, "How could I lose to you?" Biggs gritted his teeth and said, every word showed his inner anger. Li Ming was also filled with resentment. He glared at Biggs in the distance and muttered, "Damn it. I actually ran into such a powerful guy. If I didn't have magic weapon, I'm afraid I'd be in trouble." The two men stared at each other, while recovering their energy. After a moment of silence, Biggs was the first to break the silence. He slowly stretched out his right hand, and a black bead appeared in his palm. Then he threw it into the sky, and the black bead flew out of his hand. The bead flew in the air while rotating. In the blink of an eye, it came to the valley between Biggs and Li Ming. Then, a muffled sound of bang was heard, and a dazzling light shot out from the black bead. Although the light was dazzling, it only flashed for a moment and then disappeared. When the light completely disappeared, a 100-meter tall wild beast had appeared. Li Ming narrowed his eyes and glanced at it. He couldn't help but frowned. Looking at the wild beast in front of him, his face changed slightly. This is a first-level wild beast. With his keen eyes, Li Ming identified the level of this beast and showed a look of astonishment. This wild beast's head is like a stone, and its body is in a standing posture. Its two big hands have only 3 fingers, but its palms are very large, like a cat tail leaf fan. The lower part of its body also drags a long tail, which looks a bit like a crocodile. Just as Li Ming was concentrating on looking at this beast, Biggs' figure had already flown into the air. As he glanced back and forth, Li Ming's face gradually darkened. A first-level wild beast was still okay, but Biggs, who was waiting for an opportunity in the air, was not. The current situation was very clear. Facing a special opponent, Li Ming's distraction might be fatal. Thinking of this, Li Ming suddenly waved his right arm, and the light under his Hingyan Shang shone, and Walker walked out. At this time, Walker's figure was more than 1 meter long, and Mo was lying on Walker's back, with his legs crossed. One wing was placed under the head, and the other wing was throwing a round object up, catching it, throwing it up, catching it, and playing with it in this cycle. Seeing 2 wild beasts appear in Li Ming's cloak, Biggs was a little surprised at first, but when he saw the size of the 2 wild beasts, he immediately snorted with disdain. Li Ming naturally didn't care. After all, Li Ming knew the strength of the 2 star beasts, but when Li Ming inadvertently glanced at Mo beside him, he suddenly frowned, and his eyes noticed the things that kept falling from Mo's hands. "Mo, what's that thing in your hand?" Li Ming opened his eyes wide. Mo didn't care at all. After glancing at the thing in his hand, he said nonchalantly, "It's just an egg, can't I play with it?" "Ha." Li Ming looked at Mo carefully. This egg was the one that Li Ming got from the alien planet, and it absorbed a lot of mutant crystals. Li Ming was also very curious about what would hatch out of it. He didn't expect Mo to play with it so casually, so he was very worried. A pair of eyes fiercely glanced at Mo, but at this moment, he had no intention of saying anything. But at this moment of distraction, the giant beast suddenly slapped over. The huge palm fell from the sky. The attack speed of the first-level wild beast was still very amazing. The sky was dark, as if a small mountain was pressing down. Li Ming was startled, but he did not care about the attack of the giant beast. Instead, he glanced at Biggs's position with his eyes. Because Li Ming had the ability to predict, the attack of the giant beast had been sensed, but Biggs had to stay in Li Ming's field of vision at all times. After Walker noticed this, he suddenly exclaimed, "Be careful." At the critical moment, Li Ming and Walker flew out, but more on Walker's back reacted half a beat slower. When he looked up and saw the palm pressing over, he immediately exclaimed "Ah!" and the feathers all over his body exploded. With a flap of wings, he flew directly into the distance. But this action directly dropped the egg on the spot. Chapter 334 Seven-tailed Fox Beast. Although Li Ming had already jumped far away, he had seen all of Mo's actions. When Mo was running away in panic, he actually dropped the egg on the spot. Boom. A loud noise was heard, and the hilltop where Li Ming had been before collapsed and shattered instantly. It was knocked down by the giant beast's palm. Li Ming's figure had already hidden in the air far away, and his eyes immediately looked at Biggs again, while Walker also jumped lightly to a rock in the distance. Mo's body rolled in the air for a while, and fell in front of Walker with a snap. His whole body fell flat on the ground, but he quickly stood up again, and a pair of wings patted off the dust on his body. Walker glanced at it with disdain. He didn't care at first, but after a closer look, his expression suddenly became serious and he said, "Where's the egg?" "Egg?" Mo frowned, but immediately thought of something. "Oh." He turned around and opened his mouth wide, only to see that the place where he had just been was covered with dust and smoke, and the entire mountaintop disappeared. He covered his mouth with a pair of wings and looked into the distance in surprise for a long time without saying a word, but soon his eyes turned slightly and he turned back and said, "Walker, at this time, you still care about that egg? Is it more important, me or it?" Walker's eyes were fixed on the giant beast in the distance. He snorted coldly when he heard what Mo said, but did not reply. Mo became even more angry and continued to roar, "Don't make a mistake. Without me, how could Li Ming enter the first level civilization? Just an egg." Mo was roaring, and Walker's face suddenly changed. His eyes were full of cold light. He looked at Mo fiercely. When he was stared at by that look, Mo's demeanor immediately eased and he stammered, "At most, I will compensate him with another egg, that's it." As he was talking here, the giant beast's palm slowly raised up, the dust and smoke dissipated, and only a pile of rubble remained on the original mountaintop, and there were some broken eggshells among the rubble. Li Ming was in the sky, and his eyes had already noticed those eggshells. However, when the giant beast raised its palm, a 1-foot-long object appeared on the giant beast's palm. Li Ming's eyes blinked, and he was immediately attracted by the object. He looked at it intently, and found that it was a beast. Under his eyes, the breath of this beast also burst out completely, and a sense of intimacy arose spontaneously. This beast looks like a little fox, with a light yellow body and 7 tails behind its buttocks. Each tail has a different color. There is also a pair of small wings on its back, but the wings are too small, and it seems that it does not have the ability to fly. The beast was seen clinging to the palm of the giant beast, sniffing here and there, moving its body around, and it was very cute. This also made Li Ming frown and look puzzled. Could it be this is what was hatched from the egg? Judging from the breath of this beast, it is indeed the case, but thinking of the ferocious heart-shaking beast at the beginning, the appearance of the two seems to be unrelated. Walker also saw this scene at the same time. His expression tightened, his eyes showed fierceness, and his eyes turned slightly to look at Li Ming, while at the same time looking at Biggs who was farther away. The whole situation was in Walker's eyes. He thought calmly with a calm face, thinking secretly, the aliens in the distance are obviously the most threatening to the master. The little guy should be hatched from the egg. If the master is distracted at this time, it will be very disadvantageous. Mo, this idiot, can only do such stupid things. Walker thought so in his heart, and looked at Mo beside him coldly. Noticing Walker's eyes, Mo snorted with a righteous look, and then said, "Why are you looking at me? I said I didn't mean it. I will compensate him." Walker ignored the other party, turned his eyes, looked at Li Ming again, and said, "I will save the little guy. You concentrate on dealing with him." Hearing Walker's voice, Li Ming came to his senses, and turned his eyes to look at Biggs. At the first glance, Biggs was still in the same place, but when Li Ming looked at him, the figure suddenly flashed and disappeared in the same place. At the moment when the other party disappeared, Li Ming's eyebrows suddenly tightened, and the green light on his body was prosperous. Seeing this, Walker did not hesitate and ran straight towards the beast. While running, he thought to himself, if I act in advance, the master should not be distracted. As he said this to himself, the grey figure flashed and jumped quickly between the rocks, running towards the beast. The beast looked around and immediately locked onto Li Ming, not taking Walker into consideration. He raised his right hand again, intending to slap Li Ming, but at the moment, when his right hand was raised, the seven-tailed fox beast caught the attention of the beast. His eyes turned slightly, and looked at his palm. The little fox swayed its body, crawling to the left, and walking to the right, without realizing that danger had come. Walker, who was running, noticed the beast's actions with his sharp eyes, but when he looked at the little fox, he became even more worried. At this time, the beast did not move its right hand, but raised its left hand again, and the two hands formed a clapping gesture. That action was obviously to slap the fox beast to death. Seeing the giant beast's action, and looking at the fox beast who was still unaware, Walker could only secretly exclaim, "Not good." Although he had encountered a possible crisis, Walker's speed had reached its limit. After stepping on the highest rock, he leaped up, and headed straight for the giant beast's palm. The fox beast seemed to sense Walker's presence, and suddenly turned his head to look over here. His pair of shining eyes widened a little, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Seeing this cute little guy, Walker was even more excited. He smiled at the fox beast and his body was close to the palm, but at this moment, the giant beast's left hand whistled over, at an extremely fast speed, which was completely not the speed that an ordinary wild beast should have. Just like the previous slap on the mountain, it was extremely fast. Walker only felt a gust of wind coming, and his face suddenly changed. Looking at the fox beast again, it seemed that it was still unaware of the danger, and looked at him blinking its shining eyes. Walker's expression was already condensed, and he wanted to rescue the fox beast immediately with a tense look, but when he glanced left and right, it was obviously too late. Run. Walker opened his mouth and let out a violent roar. Snap. A crisp sound was heard, and the giant beast's two palms slapped together tightly. When the two palms collided, a hurricane was generated, causing Walker, who was about to approach, to be blown away by the strong wind. Under the strong wind, Walker's body was completely out of control and fell to the ground like a stone, but before he landed, a red light flashed and caught Walker. It was Moore who flew over. "Hey, brother, don't worry, I'm here," Moore said proudly, holding Walker's front paws tightly with a pair of claws. Although he was left behind by Moore, Walker's cold expression was extremely ugly. He suddenly flicked his other paw hard, and broke free from Moore's claws. His body flipped, and fell back to the ground lightly. As soon as the light footsteps landed, a pair of eyes stared in the direction of the beast. Moore looked puzzled by Walker's performance, and his figure circled for a while, and came to Walker's side on the ground. "Hey, what the hell are you? After all, I saved you." Moore took 2 steps forward, and came to Walker's side and said loudly. Walker seemed not to hear it, but looked at the direction of the beast with a serious and worried expression. Moore became even more displeased at this time, put his wings on his waist, and roared angrily, "Damn bald cat. What's your attitude?" Swish. Walker turned around suddenly, showing his blade-like claws at the same time. With a cold expression, he said viciously, "You'd better shut up. If it weren't for you, it wouldn't die. It's all your stupid fault." After saying it harshly, Walker turned around and walked towards the direction of the beast, looking at the beast with a pair of cold eyes. But the two palms of the beast did not separate immediately, but rubbed each other, just like a person clapping his hands together and rubbing them vigorously, as if he wanted to rub the things between the two hands into pieces. When Walker saw this scene, his anger was ignited. Chapter 335 Still alive. "You, really, too much." Walker's voice was not loud, but every word came out of his mouth tenaciously and powerfully. His eyes showed an unprecedented ferocity, and the surface of his body began to release grey smoke, just like black flames. Every step of Walker seemed light, but it was unusually amazing. As soon as the soft claws touched the ground, there was a bang sound, and an unusual energy breath followed. This breath was not a shock wave or an energy ripple, but a kind of deterrence. With one foot, the rock under his feet cracked instantly, and even the rocks around his body had cracks of varying degrees, as if the surroundings were cracked by this foot. The powerful breath and deterrence made people daunted and timid. However, at this moment, the giant beast suddenly paused, stopped rubbing his hands, and his expression suddenly changed, and he uttered a howl. Walker paused slightly and looked up, only to see that the giant beast's eyes slightly widened a little, and looked at the palm in front of him. This action also attracted Walker's attention. The beast's tightly closed hands actually opened a little bit, which made Walker's eyebrows tighten, and he couldn't help but look at it intently. The beast's expression changed slightly, revealing a bit of disbelief. Walker paused in place. At this time, the beast's hands had been separated to form a gap. Walker and the beast looked at the gap at the same time, and saw the figure of the fox beast emerging in the gap. The little fox beast looked at the beast head on, grinning under a stern look, staring at the beast fiercely. What? It's not dead yet. Walker was the first to show a shocked expression, and at the same time, a slight smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The beast opened its mouth, and its teeth clenched tightly together. The two sturdy arms exerted force again, trying to squeeze the fox beast again. The beast's arms trembled with a buzzing sound, and circles of energy spread out, as if the arms had become much thicker in an instant, and the energy was like water in a pipe, flowing along the arms to the hands. But the fox beast in the middle of the palm, its two little arms were stretched out to the sides, and emitting circles of light yellow halo, and then a loud bang sound was heard, and the energy pressure ring of the giant beast and the yellow halo of the fox beast collided with each other instantly. Bang! The two forces collided, making a deafening sound, like a sledgehammer hitting an iron plate. After the sound, a gust of wind rushed out from the gap between the giant beast's hands, just like ripples flying out of the palm of the giant beast. Although the giant beast had used up its maximum energy, it still couldn't do anything to the fox beast. This also made the giant beast's face change again, showing a shocked expression, looking at the fox beast with wide eyes in disbelief, and the teeth in the mouth were also creaking. But at this time, the fox beast became even more angry, staring at the other party fiercely with sharp eyes, and suddenly opened its mouth, and a beam of white light shot out of its mouth. The white light was only the thickness of a finger. As soon as it came out of his mouth, it flew towards the head of the giant beast like a bullet. It was so fast that from a distance, it looked like a piece of white dust flying towards the head of the giant beast. But as soon as the white light touched the head of the giant beast, it exploded with a bang. The sound was very light, and there was no dazzling white light. It hit the face of the giant beast like a drop of water falling on the ground, and instantly penetrated into it and disappeared. But the next moment, a circle of ripples spread out, like a layer of white gauze brushing across the entire face of the giant beast. The white gauze was like a halo, and it disappeared after a flash, but the next second, the entire head of the giant beast turned into powder, and fell down with a whoosh, like a piece of dust blown by the wind. Walker was stunned, and couldn't help saying, this little guy. Before Walker could react, the giant beast's hands had naturally loosened, and the whole body fell backwards. At this time, the fox beast was left alone in the air, but the fox beast's originally tense expression suddenly relaxed, and its face was exhausted. His eyes became more and more dull. He tried to open them, but his eyelids kept sinking. After struggling for a few times, his eyes closed by themselves. His body softened, and fell to the ground. Ah! Walker suddenly exclaimed, and his figure suddenly leaped up. There was a flash of grey light. After stepping on a few rocks, he opened his mouth and bit the little thing in his mouth. His figure turned in the air, and returned to the ground. After a few jumps, he came to a rock in the distance. He opened his mouth, and put the fox beast on the ground. Looking at this cute little guy, Walker smiled slightly. At this moment, Li Ming in the sky was already trembling with Biggs. Li Ming held a lightsaber in his hand, and his whole body was wrapped in green light. He stared at each other intently. The pair of wings behind Biggs kept flapping. His right hand held a black halo, like a dark cloud, and his left hand held a ball of air, like holding a fast spinning gyroscope. Li Ming's nerves were tense, and he was concentrating on watching the other party. His eyeballs had turned into two triangles. He was watching and thinking, what is the origin of this guy? He is so powerful. Biggs looked calm at this time. He turned his eyes to look at the giant beast lying on the ground. He didn't care. Instead, he laughed contemptuously and then returned his gaze to Li Ming. Boy, you just joined the Huai Alliance not long ago. I haven't seen you in the last battle between our Huff Alliance and the Huai Alliance. Do you want to consider quitting the Who Alliance and joining our Huff Alliance? Biggs suddenly said this, after changing the subject. Hearing this, Li Ming was also startled. He glanced at the corner of his eyes, and the situation on the ground was also taken in. Then he looked at the other party again. Judging from the individual strength of Shan Kong, Li Ming naturally still has some tricks left, but it is obvious that Biggs has not used all his strength. The two are not fighting a life and death battle with all their strength. After all, neither of them can figure out the bottom of the other party. Li Ming couldn't tell what civilization the other party was from, so it was hard to judge their strength and methods. The other party couldn't tell Li Ming's background either. After all, Li Ming had multiple civilizations and varied methods, so it was hard to judge. But the situation below was completely different. The giant beast had fallen to the ground and was motionless. It was obvious that the beasts on Li Ming's side had gained the upper hand, so Li Ming had no worries, so the situation had become favorable to Li Ming. Li Ming didn't say a word, just looked at the other party quietly, and Biggs saw that Li Ming didn't say anything, and his eyes also looked at the situation on the ground, then smiled slightly, looked at Li Ming again, and said, "It's a pity to kill you like this, but if you are stubborn, then I can only." As he said this, Biggs slowly raised his right hand and placed his palm flat in front of him. The black thing kept flickering and jumping in the palm of his hand, and the small silver white arc was like lightning in the dark cloud. It was as if Biggs's hand was a dark cloud, full of lightning and thunder. With this action, Biggs's face changed instantly, and he said coldly, "Now I might as well tell you that I'm the only space civilization in the entire Milky Way. I'm the unique successor of the space civilization in the entire Milky Way. Just like the Isaiah people in your alliance, they are silicon-based life, and they are also unique in the Milky Way. This is one of the reasons why the He-Fu Alliance and the Hua Alliance can become the largest alliance. In the last battle for Ringsu, our 5 galaxies of the He-Fu Alliance faced the 11 galaxies of the Hua Alliance and never lost. Shouldn't you reconsider your position?" Biggs continued. Li Ming didn't care about the first half of it, but when he heard the second half, Li Ming suddenly got excited, and the word Ringsu entered Li Ming's mind. Even Li Ming suddenly said in surprise, "Ringsu? Ringsu." Li Ming's cognition does of such things. This thing is extremely rare. In the vast Milky Way, the rarity of this material exceeds all other materials. The formation environment of this kind of thing is not fixed. It can be formed on any planet, but it can also be formed on no planet. There is no pattern, and no fixed source. If it can be discovered, it is naturally a great luck. This thing is a more powerful advanced material than Hang Ren in the first level civilization. Simply put, Hang Ren can only be promoted one level at a time. From the first level civilization to the second level civilization, it takes 9 levels, which is naturally very long. Moreover, the materials required by Li Ming are 3 times that of others, which is even more complicated and difficult. But Ringsu is different. Chapter 336 Close Combat. Ringsu is a material for advancing from one level to another. In other words, if a first level civilization has Ringsu, it can quickly cross the interval and go directly from the first level to the 1.3 level. As long as you have enough Liuan power, and because the ability of this thing is extremely powerful, people like Li Ming who have 3 civilizations can also use one to advance across the interval. But then again, the rarity of this thing can be imagined, and most of the Ringsu are still in rumors. Even if Li Ming looks at the members of the 2 major alliances he has seen, the highest level is only the 1.2 level civilization of Yarborough. From this point of view, no one among these people may have obtained Ringsu, but this cannot stop the high-level civilization from yearning for and pursuing this thing. Even if there is a little news about this thing, they are not afraid to spend time to see it. Of course, although Li Ming was shocked, he did not take it too seriously. The existence of this thing is indeed still under investigation. This information flashed through Li Ming's mind, and as for whether to join the He-Fu Alliance, Li Ming did not think too much, but remained silent. Biggs seemed to have lost his patience. After quietly looking at Li Ming for more than 10 seconds, he snorted coldly and said, "It seems that you really don't see the reality clearly. In this case, I have no reason to let you live." As he said this, Biggs suddenly threw his right hand into the sky. The originally small group of dark clouds slowly rose into the sky and continued to grow and expand, like a group of smoke that was constantly spreading. Rolling and rolling, the dark clouds spread out in the sky, and at the same time, the arcs in the dark clouds became thicker. The roar of crackling was endless, and lightning and thunder intertwined and changed in the dark clouds. In the blink of an eye, the sky that Li Ming could see was full of thunder clouds and lightning. That momentum seemed to be controlling the weather. Biggs' figure stood quietly in the air, and lightning kept passing by him in the dark clouds above his head. The light was like a flash, making Biggs' face dark and bright, and the sound of thunder and lightning was constantly vibrating the eardrums, making people afraid. Such a sudden change in the sky naturally attracted the attention of Walker and others below. They all looked up at the sky and felt that the originally dark ruby star became even darker. Even more, who was flying in the sky, quickly landed on a rock near Walker, looked at the fox beast, and then looked at Walker, and said, "Brother, I think the situation is a bit bad. Should we hide first?" Walker ignored him, and just looked at the fox beast in front of him quietly, but the next moment, a boom sound suddenly came from his ears. The sound was like something exploding, and even the earth trembled slightly, which made Walker quickly turn his eyes to the place where the sound came from, which was where the giant beast fell to the ground. Li Ming in the sky also moved his body and glanced at the ground. I saw that the giant beast that had originally fallen to the ground had one hand on a piece of mountain, and the top of this mountain had been knocked off by the giant beast before. At this moment, 3 fingers were holding on to the remaining mountain. After a sudden force, with the help of arm strength, the originally inverted body suddenly sat up. As soon as this phenomenon occurred, Walker's expression changed immediately, his eyes focused, and he stared at the other party closely. The giant beast sat up and did not move. Its neck was empty, and it still had no head. But after a few seconds, the dust and gravel on the ground began to gather quickly towards its head. It was as if there was a gravitational point just above its neck. The dust and gravel continued to gather and condense, and in just a moment, a new head was formed. Walker witnessed the changes of the beast with his own eyes, and his mouth twitched a few times, revealing an incredible expression. More on the side even flapped his wings and exclaimed, "Is this guy immortal?" While speaking, Moore's feet did not want to retreat a little bit, as if he was ready to escape. Walker glanced at the corner of his eyes, first looked at the fox beast, then looked at Moore sternly, and said in a cold voice, "Protect him, I will deal with that guy." So saying, Walker's eyes turned to the giant beast again, and walked towards it step by step. Moore looked at the fox beast on the ground with wide eyes, and then looked at Walker who was walking away. He was shocked and shouted, "What a joke. Who will protect me?" Walker seemed not to hear, and continued to walk towards the beast. It seems, a battle is still inevitable. Walker looked at the beast fiercely, and the grey halo on his body burned like a flame. At this time, the beast's head had been fully formed, but as the beast stood up, gravel kept sliding off its head. This head made of rocks was obviously not suitable. The eyes were like 2 black holes, looking at Walker at once, and the angry mouth was full of floating gravel, and a roar was already issued. Just like the dust erupting from the cave, along with the roar, a gravel hurricane erupted together. On one side was the tall beast, and on the other side was Walker, whose body was flashing with grey light. Although the size difference was large, both sides showed a breathtaking momentum. The sky was covered with dark clouds, and lightning flashed continuously. Every flash of lightning instantly illuminated an area of airspace, and the rolling dark clouds seemed like a rainstorm was about to fall. Biggs looked at Li Ming coldly, with the corners of his mouth slightly raised, and said in a cold voice, "The air and space domain has been laid out. Next, it's time to perform." Li Ming glanced at the dense clouds in the sky and the frequently flashing lightning. He stared at the other party with his eyes, clenched his lightsaber with his right hand, and clenched his teeth tightly in his mouth, saying secretly, "Air and space civilization." Whispering in his mouth, Li Ming's face was already cautious. There is no doubt that this is a civilization that Li Ming has never come into contact with, and the other party's ability is also completely unknown to Li Ming. From transformation to summoning high-level wild beasts, to now calling the wind and rain. It not only reveals the mystery of the other party's civilization, but also shows the powerful power of this civilization. This kind of unknown is what Li Ming must be extremely careful about. Without waiting for Biggs to do anything else, Li Ming took the lead this time. His figure shook and disappeared on the spot. Instant light slash. A whisper sounded in his ears. When he heard the sound, the lightsaber was less than half a foot away from his body. With this speed and attack method, unless the opponent had the same teleportation ability as Li Ming, it would be impossible to dodge. Swoosh, bang. The aurora passed through the air in an arc, but the bang sounded as if the light blade hit an elastic object. Feathers fell like leaves, and Biggs flew away directly after this attack. It was like an object that was hit by the lightsaber in Li Ming's hand, but it did not seem to cause any harm to the opponent. Li Ming looked closely and saw that the front of Biggs' body flashed slightly, and then a pair of wings opened from the front of his body, as if his body was originally wrapped by the wings. Although his slightly narrowed eyes were already a wise eye, he could not see through the opponent's changes just now. After the wings spread out, Li Ming suddenly realized that Biggs actually had two pairs of wings on his back. The previous pair of wings had been used for flying, and the second pair of wings appeared only after Li Ming's slash. Moreover, the second pair of wings had been in stealth mode and wrapped around its body, so there was no abnormality. However, under Li Ming's instant slash, the attack was completely blocked by the feather wings, which resulted in the falling feathers. Li Ming saw through this information in just 1 second and hit the target. Without any pause, he flew again and continued to press forward. Biggs was also greatly surprised by Li Ming's instant slash, but he had no time to think about it as Li Ming continued to approach. After a cold smile, he said, "Close combat? Then let me see what you can do." With his left hand across his chest, the airflow in his left hand suddenly extended and became longer, forming a long sword. This sword was composed of constantly rotating airflow, just like a constantly rotating tornado. With a flash of light, Li Ming's lightsaber slashed directly, and a light sound of snap was heard, and the hurricane sword blocked Li Ming's attack. The lightsaber continuously released high temperatures and powerful cutting capabilities, but the rotating hurricane was not inferior at all. The intersection of the two did not produce a huge energy fluctuation, but the two weapons were consuming each other. One attack was blocked, and Li Ming changed his technique and attacked with another sword. His teeth were tightly clenched, and he kept making vicious sounds. Biggs was not to be outdone. After a cold snort, he swung the hurricane sword and began to counterattack. In the sky, lightning flashed continuously, and the figures of the two people went up and down, constantly changing and flashing under the interweaving of light and electricity, and the offense and defense were constantly changing, which made people dizzy. Chapter 337, Finding a Future. The giant beast on the ground moved, and its two huge claws rushed towards Walker, as if it was going to beat Walker to death. A grey light flashed, and Walker's figure was like a grey sphere with an afterimage. The figure bounced directly onto the arm of the giant beast, after hitting a rock, and then went straight to the head of the giant beast along the arm. The giant beast was quite responsive, but compared with the more responsive Walker, it was obviously inferior. When its eyes turned to its arm, Walker had already reached its shoulder. The giant beast quickly turned its head to the side, but before the other party could react, Walker's two claws crossed and swung. Swish. 6 claw blades were swung out in an interlaced manner. Although Walker's claw blades only extended a foot long, at the moment of swinging, a light wave flashed, and the claw blades extended more than 10 meters in length and width. What extended out was not a real claw blade, but a shockwave. After a flash of light, the giant beast's head was cut into 6 pieces like bread. From a distance, it seemed as if Walker had swung out 6 waves of light at once. This attack was similar to Adriana's sword wave. The difference was that the sword wave could continue to fly out, but the ripples formed by the claw blade only appeared for a moment. After hitting the target, Walker's figure rolled back onto a rock. Moore saw this scene and opened his mouth wide. He looked at Walker again. He seemed to think of himself being cut into 6 pieces. He said to himself, "This bold cat is really not to be trifled with." Walker turned slightly and looked back at the beast. With concentration, his originally calm demeanor suddenly condensed. The head of the beast, that was cut into pieces by Walker, did not fall off, but gradually condensed and restored to its original appearance. Sure enough, this kind of attack is ineffective. Walker's face had become solemn, and his eyes were completely locked on the beast. Just as Walker was about to attack again, the thunder in the sky suddenly intensified, and the boom lightning became more dense. Biggs raised his right hand high, and at the same time, a stream of electricity shot out from his hand, connecting to the dark clouds in the sky. Your close combat is really stronger than I thought, but everything is over, he said fiercely, and the lightning in the sky suddenly flashed alternately, and each lightning instantly lit up the sky. Such dense lightning made Li Ming frown slightly, and the lightsaber in his right hand began to slowly disappear. His mind was already focused on the flashing lightning. But at this moment, a lightning bolt suddenly broke through the air and headed straight for Li Ming. Lightning can release a high temperature of nearly 30,000 degrees in an instant, which is equivalent to 3 to 5 times the temperature of the sun's surface. The extreme heat causes the air along the way to expand violently, causing the air to move rapidly and form waves to emit thunder. Under this kind of attack, no life can withstand it, and Li Ming knows this very well, because the electric shock that Li Ming once released has this power, which can make a creature disappear in an instant. Boom. The deafening thunder roared directly into his ears, and the white light flashed in 0.1 seconds, making people feel as if it had never appeared. After the lightning, Li Ming still stayed where he was, without any injury, but a creaking sound rang in his ears. Li Ming's eyes moved slightly, and a crack appeared in the golden shield beside him. The golden light of the magic shield completely protected Li Ming, like a round egg, with a hard golden light phantom on the outside, and golden mist inside. The golden mist made Li Ming's figure gradually blurred, but it effectively resisted the lightning strike. The crack on the surface was like an eggshell cracked, but after a second, the golden mist poured into the crack and repaired it. Seeing this, Big's eyes widened a little, revealing a bit of surprise. Then he gritted his teeth tightly, and at the same time, his right hand suddenly pushed upward with force, and the current connecting the dark cloud and the palm suddenly became a little thicker. Li Ming also saw this move, but the next second, another lightning bolt struck from the dark clouds. Crack. The sound was like something exploding in the eardrum, making the brain buzz. This lightning bolt instantly illuminated the entire night sky. It was like a giant flash bomb that suddenly illuminated all the surroundings in less than a second. The sound was deafening, and the light illuminated everything around. From a distance, it looked like a vertically falling nerve line. The middle one was extremely thick, and the others were branches of this lightning, which were relatively thin. And this was the super lightning. If ordinary lightning generates about 1 billion watts of electricity, then the super lightning generates at least 100 billion watts of electricity, and may even reach trillions to 100 trillion watts. After the light, Li Ming continued to stand in the same place, but it was a little different from before. His body was slightly tired, and even blood was flowing from his left shoulder. The golden mist was already very thin, and the hard golden shield had a big hole in it, just like an egg with a crack, and the golden mist inside was constantly overflowing from it. What? Big's eyes widened a little, his face showed disbelief, and he muttered, "This? How is it possible?" Biggs's face was already very ugly, and his open lips revealed a mouthful of sharp teeth. When he looked at Li Ming, his attitude was completely different from before. Biggs was very clear about the power of such an attack, and even conceded that no one in the same range could withstand this attack. However, Li Ming, who seemed to be an ordinary first-level civilization, repeatedly refreshed his views. From the artifact Yanhei, to summoning wild beasts, to close combat, and even to super lightning, Li Ming dealt with them one by one, which was definitely an unexpected result. At this time, his face was also slightly pale, which was caused by excessive energy consumption. Compared with him, Li Ming was in a worse situation. He couldn't help but suffer some injuries, and his energy was also overconsumed. However, in order to avoid the next battle that might be unfavorable to him, Li Ming continued to take a large number of nebula pills to ensure the supply of energy. Biggs slowly lowered his right hand that was originally connected to the sky, and the current disappeared immediately. The dark clouds began to dissipate little by little. Biggs looked at Li Ming with great reluctance in his heart and could not help but whispered secretly, "Liuan pill. I have already taken 2. At this moment, Liuan pill is an extremely important resource. For him, there is no need to continue using it." Thinking of this, Biggs's expression relaxed slightly, and at this time the dark clouds in the sky had almost dissipated. Seeing the disappearing celestial phenomenon, the golden light around Li Ming's body also began to slowly dissipate. Biggs snorted coldly, and his mouth opened slightly, to let out a low laugh. Hehe. He smiled and looked at Li Ming. After taking a long breath, he said, "If you can survive this galaxy war, I will still have a real competition with you. At that time, I will use all my strength. As for this time, let's stop here." As soon as he finished speaking, Biggs glanced at Li Ming and flew away quickly. Although the other party said this, Li Ming's eyes did not leave his body at all, and he kept a cautious posture, his eyes moving with the other party's body in the air. Biggs suddenly stopped when flying over the giant beast and waved his right hand downward. The originally irritable giant beast suddenly paused, looked up at Biggs, and then with a bang, a dazzling white light flashed. The originally ferocious giant beast turned into a bead and floated into the air until it was in Biggs's hand. After taking away the giant beast, Biggs flew away quickly. Li Ming remained motionless, just watching Biggs' figure going away. Only after he disappeared did Li Ming breathe a sigh of relief. His tense nerves relaxed, and he breathed deeply. His eyes couldn't help but look at Walker and others on the ground. With a move of his body, Li Ming slowly floated to the ground. At this moment, a silver-white alien was rushing towards Li Ming. Its speed was extremely fast, higher than the first-level civilization. Although it was not riding a flying vehicle, it was no less than a flying vehicle. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338 Quarrel. The ground was full of traces of battles, cracked rocks, and damage to the ground between the mountains, caused by energy shocks. The silver-white alien stood in the air motionless. His eyes kept looking down, looking at the debris left by the battle, and then looked up at the night sky, thinking, the thunder and lightning phenomenon just now should be here. It seems that the battle has just ended. As he said this, he looked puzzled, and his eyes looked into the distance of the night sky again, and whispered, could it be that a member of the Hua Alliance fought with the Huff Alliance? Whispering in his mouth, the silver-white alien frowned slightly and stood still, his eyes moving like a scanner, to take in all the conditions on the ground. Just as he was looking casually, a blue shadow suddenly flashed behind an inconspicuous stone on the ground, and a 1-foot-long blue creature suddenly ran away. The moving object immediately attracted the attention of the alien, and the figure moved and flew away like an arrow. The silver figure flashed and came to the ground and stood in front of the blue creature. This blue creature is 1 foot long, with a head like a football and a round eye on top of its head. The eye is like a ping pong ball, emitting a faint blue light. Blue spirit beast. Looking at this beast, the silver-white alien gave a strange smile. The blue spirit beast was startled when it sensed the breath of the silver-white alien, and its body trembled slightly with fear, and it stayed where it was without moving. Just as the silver-white alien was about to move forward, a beeping sound suddenly came from its right wrist, and then it paused and raised its wrist. A white device on the wrist then scattered blue light, and the light intertwined and woven to form a screen pattern, and the figures on it were Abel and Gija. Xenia, what's going on over there? Abel spoke first. Xenia quickly replied, I'm still a little late here. Everyone is gone. But, at this point, Xenia's eyes suddenly turned to the blue spirit beast, and the corner of his mouth raised slightly, smiling. But I found something. It may record everything that happened here. I will take it back later. Yaburo nodded slightly and replied, okay. The call ended, and the connection was immediately disconnected, and Xenia's eyes turned slightly, staring at the blue spirit beast with a strange smile. At this moment, under a huge rock deep in the mountains, Li Ming sat cross-legged on the ground, his whole body flashing green light, resting and recuperating. Not far from Li Ming, Walker was lying next to the fox beast, looking at the little guy who was still unconscious. Walker was at a loss for a moment, just occasionally looking at Li Ming. At this time, Moore was watching this side, sometimes using his claws to dig on the ground boredly, and his figure approached Walker intentionally or unintentionally. Only when he was only a foot away from Walker and the fox did Moore lean over and look at the unconscious fox on the ground, hesitatingly saying, "This little guy's tail is so beautiful." As soon as he finished speaking, Moore pointed at the little tail with one wing and counted, 1, 2, 3. "Shut up." Walker suddenly turned his head and said angrily, staring at Moore fiercely. Moore was startled, but soon came to his senses. Just as he was about to roar, he lowered his voice and said, "Why are you so fierce?" Walker suddenly stood up and walked towards Moore with a fierce look. Looking at Walker, who was approaching him step by step with a fierce expression, Moore could only retreat step by step in fear. After a few steps, Moore was forced into a rock corner. With its back against the rock, its wings fully opened, it blinked its eyes and looked at Walker, tremblingly saying, What are you going to do?" Walker suddenly stopped, looked at Moore coldly, showing his sharp teeth, and said, "Open your eyes and see clearly. The master is seriously injured, and the little guy's life or death is unknown, and you, a fool, are still acting as if nothing has happened." Moore suddenly looked displeased and roared, "What does this have to do with me? My ability is limited. What do you want me to do?" Walker continued to look at him fiercely, sighed slightly, and whispered, "Get out." Moore looked puzzled. Walker suddenly became angry and roared in a low voice, "You should get out. You are just a fool who will cause trouble." Moore, who heard this, suddenly gasped and flapped his wings violently. The wings passed through the ground in front of him, and the sand and stones flew with it. The action was like overturning a table. He looked at Walker with a frown and said angrily, "You bald cat. Why do you treat me like this? I have tried my best. That egg. I didn't mean to do that to that little guy. It's just an egg. I will compensate you." The furious Moore showed a tough posture, as if he had forgotten his fear. Walker couldn't help but take 2 steps back, staring at the other party. After a long time, he turned around and said, "I don't want to see you again." So saying, Walker returned to the side of the fox beast, then slowly lay down and didn't move. Moore waved his wings disdainfully, walked away into the dark night sky, and said, "Don't be so self-indulgent. I have never really liked you, before and now." As he spoke, his figure gradually disappeared in the night sky. Walker didn't move, but his eyes moved to the corners of his eyes, looking at the direction where Moore disappeared. When Moore's figure completely disappeared in the darkness, Walker's head suddenly raised, as if he was reluctant and worried, but a few seconds later he snorted and lay down again. Moore's figure gradually went farther and farther, and he had unknowingly entered a dark rock area, and he kept muttering, "A bunch of self-righteous guys. Do you really think I like being with them? Are you kidding?" Crack. A light sound was heard, and Moore's mouth, which was whispering, suddenly closed. His body stopped in place, as if the picture was frozen. He looked nervous, his eyes widened, and his eyeballs moved back and forth in his eye sockets. He looked around and checked everywhere. He thought to himself, "What was that sound just now?" A breeze blew by. The wind was not strong, but the sound of the wind made Moore's body tremble slightly, and beads of sweat could not help but flow on his forehead. He lowered his head slightly and looked down at his feet. It turned out that he had just stepped on a small corroded stone and broke it. Seeing this, Moore breathed a sigh of relief and his nervous expression relaxed slightly. But when he saw the inexplicable darkness around him, he couldn't help but feel a little scared again. Why is this damn place so dark everywhere? It's so scary. No, I'd better go back first. Just as he was about to leave, he paused and stopped in his place. After gritting his teeth, he said to himself, "No, wouldn't it be even more embarrassing to go back now? That bald cat will look down on me even more. Humph, what's there to be afraid of?" As Moore said this, a red light flashed on his body, and Hu Kang's ability was released, instantly covering a large area nearby. Under the red light sensing, Moore clearly perceived the objects within the coverage range, and there was nothing abnormal. After doing this, Moore smiled triumphantly and said to himself, "This is safe." After that, he continued to walk away. At this time, Li Ming's slightly closed eyes slowly opened, The wound had basically recovered, but the energy in his body still needed some time, even though he had taken a lot of nebula pills. His eyes turned slightly and looked at Walker and the fox beast. When Walker saw Li Ming wake up, he stood up. Li Ming's expression was a little serious. Li Ming had already detected the previous conversation between Walker and Moore. He did not stop Walker because he was concentrating on healing his wounds just now. However, he did not mean to blame Walker. He just said, "I think you should communicate with Moore in another way." Walker did have some regrets at this time, but he didn't know what to say when he looked at Li Ming's eyes. Li Ming was concentrating on healing his wounds just now, so he did not stop the conflict between Walker and Moore. After taking a deep breath, his expression returned to calmness and said, "In front of you, I have never regarded myself as a master." Chapter 339, a win-win strategy. I think you are all my partners, so, although I can control you with my consciousness, I have never done so. My former home planet civilization told me that I need to get along with you in an equal way, at any time. Li Ming looked at Walker and said. Walker looked into Li Ming's eyes and understood his words, but he remained silent for the moment. Looking at the direction where Maud disappeared, Walker whispered, "He will come back by himself, and then I will apologize to him." Li Ming smiled slightly and said no more. At this moment, inside a mountain, 3 aliens were sitting in a room. This mountain is also one of the teleportation arrays, but it is relatively more hidden, and there are many facilities inside the mountain. In addition to the teleportation array, there are many other independent rooms and aircraft. The 3 people sitting in the room at this moment are Abel, Xenia, and Yeager. The 3 sat around the table, looking at the sky above the table. In the corner of the table, the blue spirit beast with a football-like head was opening its eyes wide, and its whole body was tense, both afraid and nervous. Its background eyes were constantly releasing blue light, which was weaving in the air, and a picture gradually emerged. The content of the picture was exactly the process of Li Ming's previous battle with Biggs. The beast's unique ability recorded it, and it reappeared in front of the 3 aliens. The angle of the picture was not clear, and the previous position of the blue spirit beast also led to an incomplete record of the battlefield. But during this flickering picture, important factors were also revealed. One was Li Ming, a new member of the Tillman people who the 3 knew, and the other was Biggs, an old rival who the 3 knew, one of the 3 major forces of the He-Fu Alliance. These 2 pieces of information were enough to make the 3 people dumbfounded and shocked. They even looked at each other, with solemn faces, slightly open mouths, and eyes full of incredible and unbelievable. At the end of the picture, the 3 people even sighed. From the picture, it can be seen that Li Ming and Biggs did not win or lose, and finally they each withdrew their hands and left, and it also showed the direction in which the 2 sides went when they separated. However, the incomplete footage did not show the initial fight between the 2 sides with the artifacts. Even the other fighting scenes were fragmented and incomplete. After these contents were played, Abel leaned back slightly and fell into deep thought. Xenia shook his head and said, "If you hadn't seen this scene with your own eyes, it would be unbelievable." Yeager also took a deep breath and said, "He is a first-level civilization, but he can be invincible in front of Biggs. Even 1.2 level civilizations like Xenia and I can't do this in front of Biggs." Xenia then nodded and continued, "Biggs has the artifact illusion. The only one in our alliance who can fight him is Commander Abel, and this guy Li Ming actually." As the 2 said this, their eyes turned to Abel. At this time, Abel seemed particularly calm. Although he was a little shocked, he didn't want to be as exaggerated as Xenia and Yeager. He was thinking deeply and whispered, "Have you forgotten the energy duel before coming to Ruby Star?" When this was said, Xenia and Yeager were stunned, as if they suddenly thought of something. Their eyes widened again. Abel continued at this time, "This guy with unknown origins is not simple. According to the report sent back from the Croft Galaxy, this guy named Li Ming killed the prison station master Bridges and destroyed a large number of facilities on Bergson Star. During the energy duel on Isaiah Star, this person's energy number once soared to 28. Abel continued. After hearing this, Yeager and Xenia immediately began to ponder. Yarborough rolled his eyes, looked at the 2 men, and said, "Being able to fight Biggs without losing means that he also has the ability to fight me. It's probably not that easy to kill him." If this guy wants to leak Croft's secrets to other alliances, then we have no way to do it. The current situation is very passive for us, Yarborough said in a long and heavy voice, and his inner worries were fully revealed. In addition to looking for Han Ren, Yarborough went to Han Gaiu Star this time, to kill Li Ming to prevent Croft's secrets from being leaked. In addition, Li Ming brought such a huge loss to Croft, so it was natural to kill Li Ming. But after reading the record information in front of him, Yarborough's attitude towards killing Li Ming has changed. Now this person's whereabouts are unknown. Even if he is found, it is not easy to kill him. This is already very disadvantageous for us. Yarborough said this, and couldn't help but sigh slightly. Xenia's eyes moved slightly, looking at Jija, and then at Abel. After thinking for a moment, his eyebrows suddenly relaxed and he said, "Commander Abel, I have an idea about this person. I wonder if it is feasible." Abel immediately turned his eyes away. Jija also looked at him, and the two of them looked at Xenia waiting for his next words. Seeing this, Xenia continued, "Since it is not easy to kill him, we might as well take him into the Alliance headquarters and let him represent the Tillmans, to join the top leadership of the Alliance headquarters. In this way, we can control him, and use him for our own benefit." After saying this, Abel and Jija nodded slightly, but still showed hesitation. Xenia smiled and continued, "To put it another way, this galaxy war is almost inevitable. Strengthening the strength of our alliance is a good idea. Now all alliances are preparing for the galaxy war, either by stockpiling elixirs, or attracting various combat talents. If we continue to choose to kill Li Ming, the success rate will not be high, and we may also cause trouble. Instead of doing this, why don't we try our best to win him over?" Xenia continued. After hearing the latter words, Yija was the first to nod his head repeatedly, agreeing very much. Abel's expression also eased a lot. The previous sadness was gone, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said, "Hearing what you said, this is really a win-win strategy, which can avoid the disclosure of the Croft Galaxy incident and leave a master to fight against the galaxy war. It's really good." After hearing Abel's agreement, Xenia also smiled and nodded. "Okay, let's do it. Spread the news now, and tell all the galaxies. Anyone who finds Li Ming's whereabouts should report it in time. I want to talk to him in person. We will leave together." As Yarborough spoke, he stood up, as if he was determined to get Li Ming. At the same time, Li Ming still stayed beside the huge rock. His injuries had basically recovered, and the energy in his body had basically recovered under the maintenance of the nebula pill, but Li Ming's face became a little sad. His eyes kept looking into the distance, and sometimes looked at Walker, and said, "More, haven't you come back yet?" Walker also turned his gaze to the dark distance after hearing this. After confirming that there was no movement, he shook his head slightly. Li Ming frowned slightly, and couldn't help but sighed softly. He stood up, and came to Walker's side, then bowed his head to look at the fox beast on the ground. After hesitating for a while, he waved his right hand, and put the fox beast into Hingayan Shang. He looked at Walker, stood up and said, "Let's go and find him." With that, Li Ming walked in the direction where Moore left. Walker jumped onto Li Ming's shoulder, and slowly lay down without saying a word. At this moment, Moore was still walking slowly in the mountains, but he looked tired, his mouth open, his tongue hanging out, his eyes dull, and the red light emitted from his body flickered. Although this is safe, it consumes too much energy. I'd better take a break. Whispering, Moore came to a rock next to him and lay down. After putting away the red light, he began to breathe heavily. While Moore was resting, his eyes suddenly saw something, and he couldn't help but be refreshed, and paid more attention to the place not far away from where he stood up. Chapter 340, Poison. Not far in front of Moore, a small pit surrounded by gravel appeared a number of spherical objects. The pit was made up of small pieces of gravel, only 1 foot long and wide, but there were a lot of objects similar to eggs, piled up in it. From the surface, it seemed that these were eggs of some creature. "Eggs," Moore suddenly exclaimed, and suddenly became energetic, flapping his wings and ran over. After coming closer, Moore picked up one at random with his wings, and looked at it carefully. After observing it for a while, Moore smiled and said to himself, "It's an egg." As he said this, his eyes looked around. After confirming that there were no other creatures around, Moore flapped his wings, picked up another one, and walked back on the road, and said to himself proudly as he walked, "Let's see what they have to say this time." Mo just kept walking, but he didn't know that many eyes had appeared behind him in the dark. At this time, Li Ming had gradually entered a barren area. This was the edge of the mountain range. It was no longer a high mountain, but more like an undulating wilderness, like waves on the sea level. As for how long he had walked, Li Ming could no longer remember. Hangzhou star seemed to be a star of eternal night, with no light. Li Ming completely let go of his consciousness, and searched for Mo's breath and whereabouts while walking. Walker was also very alert, and looked around with his eyes, but as time went by, Mo seemed to have really left them, without any trace. This made Li Ming show some worry. In any case, Mo was the best partner to help Li Ming enter the first level civilization. Without Mo, Li Ming's nebula would have been shattered on Bergson star, not to mention the current level of civilization. Therefore, Li Ming was still very eager to find Mo. Walker was also in regret, looking around with his eyes, eager to find Mo's whereabouts. After walking for a long time, Li Ming suddenly stopped in place, and not far away from Li Ming, a small figure also stopped. The two looked at each other and paused. Mo? Before Li Ming spoke, Walker, who was leaning on his shoulder, suddenly became alert. Mo also opened his eyes with excitement, but when he saw Walker, he snorted coldly and said, "The reason I came back was to return the eggs you wanted. I didn't really want to come back to you." As Mo was talking, Li Ming and Walker's faces suddenly changed. Among them, Li Ming frowned, and stood still with a stern look, as if facing a great enemy. Not only Li Ming, but even Walker's face, was extremely ugly at this moment, and that look was even more terrified than the giant beast he had seen before. Li Ming and Walker's expressions startled Mo, but soon Mo turned angry and shouted, "What do you mean by that expression? Don't you believe me?" Mo roared while fiddling with something in his feathers. But Mo didn't know that behind Mo, there were already hundreds of eyes looking at this place. But Li Ming and Walker saw all this, and the two could only stay where they were, and try not to alarm those guys. Mo, who still knew nothing about this, suddenly raised his wings, as if he was stretching out his palms. Two white spheres appeared in his wings. They were the two eggs that Mo picked up. A few feathers waved back and forth, and the two eggs kept turning back and forth on the feathers, just like an old man playing with a fitness ball, fiddling back and forth, and at the same time, he said, "See, I can give you two eggs back." Mo's action immediately attracted many eyes behind him. Hundreds of eyes focused on the two eggs in Mo's wings. Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly, and looked behind Mo. Behind Mo, there were all wild beasts. These wild beasts were huge in number. Each of them looked a bit like a snake, but their bodies were thicker than snakes, and the black scales on their bodies seemed to be extremely hard. In the animal illustrations, this wild beast is called Dukian, about 3 meters long, living in dark rocks, a social species, highly poisonous, and with an extremely fast attack speed. Although this beast is not of high rank, under its toxicity, no life can escape. Knowing the power of these things, Li Ming was extremely careful, and did not dare to act rashly. Judging from the position of these poisonous beasts, they would not threaten Li Ming, but Mo was close, so it was hard to say. Therefore, for Mo's safety, he could not act rashly. Walker stared at Mo all the time. His face was extremely ugly, and even a little resentful. He could not help but whispered, "Mo, this idiot, can only." Although the voice was very low, Mo seemed to have heard something, and his eyes turned to the other party. But Mo did not know that the group of poisonous beasts behind him were approaching him little by little. Mo snorted disdainfully, and suddenly flapped his wings, threw one of the eggs up, and then caught it back on his wings. The two eggs were like acrobatics in his hands, tossing, catching, tossing, catching. The two eggs kept circulating in his hands. At the same time, he kept saying, "Bald cat, I saw a cat, this is strength. I got you two eggs that you wanted. Are you convinced?" Mo said this, but no one listened. All the poisonous beasts behind him stopped one after another. Each of them showed a worried look on their faces, fearing that the eggs would fall to the ground. All their eyes followed the two eggs as they were thrown up, and fell down like lights. It was as if their eyes had locked onto the two eggs. When the eggs were thrown up, all their eyes followed them up. When the eggs fell again, All their eyes followed them down. Not only this group of poisonous beasts, but even Li Ming and Walker were looking at the eggs in Moore's hand with worry, their eyes jumping up and down. Moore smiled smugly to himself, but he seemed to have noticed something wrong. He looked closely at Li Ming and Walker, because the two of them were looking at the eggs in his hands. This surprised and displeased Moore. He clenched his wings lightly and stopped throwing the two eggs. This sudden stop made Li Ming and Walker's eyes stop, and the many poisonous snakes behind Moore also stopped their rise and stopped on Moore's wings. Moore showed a surprised look. The wings moved again, and the two eggs were thrown up again, and Li Ming and Walker's eyes moved again. Seeing this, Moore was furious and glanced at Li Ming and Walker fiercely. His mouth was slightly open, his teeth kept jumping, and his eyes were full of anger. He opened his mouth and shouted angrily, You really only care about the eggs, and don't care about me at all. It seems, I think too much. I really should leave. Moore said, blinking his eyes, revealing endless sadness, as if tears were about to flow out. He turned his head slightly and looked at the two eggs in his wings, and at this moment, Moore's eyes seemed to see something suddenly. Moore, don't move, Li Ming said quickly. At this time, Moore's body was completely stiff, and his 2 feet were shaking constantly. Because the shaking was too violent, his toes and the gravel on the ground made a slight squeak sound. Li Ming gently leaned over and said, Don't be nervous, Moore. First put the egg gently on the ground. Gently, put it on the ground. Moore was already in tears at this time, and said in a crying voice, I'm not nervous, but I'm shaking. I can't control it. As he spoke, his body slowly lowered its wings according to Li Ming's instructions, preparing to put the 2 eggs back on the ground. But as the wings got lower and lower, the whole wings began to tremble. Looking at Moore's shaking body, Walker whispered angrily, Can this idiot stop shaking? As Moore's wings slowly approached the ground, the group of poisonous turtles also slowly lowered their bodies, and their heads and eyes moved little by little with Moore's wings. But at this moment, Moore was so scared that he didn't dare to look directly at his own wings. With a light pop sound, an egg slipped from Moore's wings and broke directly onto the ground, with egg liquid flowing all over the ground. Sure, all the poisonous turtles raised their bodies in unison, and each of them opened their angry eyes wide, as if flames had already come out of their eyes. And at this moment, with another light pop sound, another egg also slipped directly to the ground. Chapter 341 Talent Equation. All the poisonous beasts had no time to vent their anger, and immediately looked at the ground in surprise. At this time, the poisonous beasts gnashed their teeth, their eyes were wide open, and each eye was locked on Moore. I said I didn't mean it. Do you believe it? Moore looked aggrieved, and even shed tears, and said to the group of poisonous beasts with apology. At this time, Li Ming shook his head helplessly and said angrily, I don't believe it. As soon as he said this, Li Ming's right hand suddenly swung, the lightsaber flew out of his hand, and his figure jumped up. But the speed of the poisonous beasts was faster, and the distance between the poisonous beasts and Moore was closer. I saw a line of poisonous beasts jumping up, and each figure was like a black line, like a dense black net. Under such an attack, Moore had no chance of escaping. In fear, he could only raise his wings and hug his head, and let out a loud roar of "Ah!" Li Ming wanted to rush over, but it was too late. Although he was extremely anxious and worried, he could only watch as Moore was about to be devoured by the poisonous beast. After all, the poisonous beast was extremely poisonous. Even if Li Ming was bitten by one of them, he might still lose his life. At this critical moment, Walker, who was on Li Ming's shoulder, suddenly jumped and shot out like a grey light. With Li Ming's original speed bonus, Walker's speed was greatly improved. However, despite this, the poisonous beast had already approached Moore. It could even be said that the teeth of the poisonous beast were already on the surface of Moore's skin. It would take less than a second to bite him. Watching this scene, Walker's eyes suddenly widened a little, and his eyes were focused on Moore. At the same time, a grey energy had already emerged on the surface of Moore's body at that moment. This grey glowing energy seemed to be originally on Walker's body surface. I can only use this ability. Walker Schrödinger equation, sizzle. Walker just said something in his heart, and suddenly there was a sound of teeth entering the flesh. At this time, Du Yan bit down not Moore. but Walker. This is one of Walker's innate abilities equation. The reason why star beasts are powerful and different from magic beasts and wild beasts is that star beasts have multiple talents, and the abilities of their talents are also completely different. Equation is one of Walker's talents. This ability is to exchange its own position with the position of the ability target in an instant. At the same time, no matter how dangerous the situation is, Walker has a 50% chance of survival. Whether it is the poison of Du Yan or Li Ming being cut in half, Walker has a 50% chance of survival. This moment happened right in front of Li Ming. Without time to think, Li Ming grabbed Mo, who was replaced, and flew away at the same time. Looking at the poisonous beasts that surrounded Walker, Li Ming waved his right hand angrily, and the lightsaber in his hand instantly turned into electromagnetic waves. White electromagnetic waves shot out and directly connected to the group of poisonous beasts. Electromagnetic wave chain. Li Ming whispered, and suddenly the electric light flashed, and the current spread out, and the entire piece of poisonous beasts was connected together. Li Ming then clenched his right hand hard, and with a muffled sound of bang, all the connection points exploded directly. A strong white light flashed in front of his eyes, and all the poisonous beasts instantly fell to the ground with green smoke, as if they were burnt. After 1 or 2 seconds, they all fell down. After doing this, Li Ming rushed over in one step, and saw that the ground was full of poisonous beasts. Crouching down, Li Ming gently pushed away the bodies, and a grey figure was lying at the bottom motionless. When he saw the grey feather, Li Ming immediately focused his eyes. Moore also opened his eyes wide, looking at the grey fluffy position lying on the ground. Suddenly, something came to his mind. His mouth suddenly opened, and he covered his mouth with a wing, unable to make a sound for a long time. Li Ming slowly picked up Walker from the ground. Walker was still conscious at this time, but the poison had already entered his body. His body was limp and powerless. He only opened his eyes slightly, looked at Moore, and whispered, "You idiot. I saved you again." After saying this, his eyes slowly closed by themselves, as if he fell asleep. Li Ming frowned at this, and after being in a daze for a moment, he waved his right hand, and put Walker into Hingyan. Moore looked at this scene, and suddenly turned his eyes, to look at Li Ming, and said, You save him, don't you have the ability of the Guangyao clan?" Li Ming turned around, and walked away without saying a word. But at this time, Moore couldn't stop shedding tears. Looking at Li Ming's indifferent expression, he cried silently and said, "You actually wanted to save me. Go in peace. I will definitely bury you properly, my friend, Walker." At the end, Moore was even more heartbroken and burst into tears. Upon hearing this, Li Ming glanced at Moore coldly, and his body paused. He kept looking at Moore from the corner of his eyes, and then said, "If you bury him now, he will be really dead." Moore was shocked. When he heard this, his expression froze, his eyes widened a little, and he opened his mouth and said, "What do you mean?" Li Ming then continued to walk away, took a deep breath, and said, "Walker used his innate ability, equation, when he saved you. Once this ability is used, no matter whether Walker's environment deep inside is safe or dangerous, he has a 50% chance of surviving. So, everything depends on luck." Moore was shocked when he heard this, and hurriedly said, "So, he still has a great chance of surviving?" Li Ming nodded slightly and replied, "Yes." Upon hearing this, Moore flapped his wings happily, turned around, and turned into a red light, and entered Hangyanshan. Li Ming didn't care, but his expression was still solemn. No matter what, Walker's chance of survival was only 50%, so this ability was still worrying. After all, Li Ming didn't want to lose such a partner easily. Put Walker in Hangyanshan, and the rest could only be left to fate. In the dark night sky, Li Ming's figure gradually disappeared, and only the dark rocks around, and the endless mountains in the distance could be seen. Release the flying dragon. Li Ming flew slowly in the air, and the flying dragon was like Li Ming's clone, cooperating with Li Ming to explore the surrounding areas, so that he kept flying along the mountains. Whenever he saw an abnormal phenomenon, Li Ming would let the flying dragon come closer to see what was going on. This search speed is relatively fast, which makes it easier for Li Ming to find useful things or Hangren. Originally, Li Ming's purpose was only Hangren, but after obtaining new energy, Li Ming's perspective has changed slightly. U energy is a kind of special energy, which is at the same level as mutant energy, but has different uses and different rarity. Different energies can only be produced on specific planets. Li Ming needs more knowledge about these to expand, which is also indispensable for Li Ming's future growth. Therefore, in the following search, Li Ming must pay more attention to all valuable objects. However, both mutant energy and U energy are rare. The conditions for the formation of these special energies are extremely harsh, just like a treasure in nature, which may only be discovered accidentally. On this kind of planet, there is no fixed place or area to produce this thing, and Li Ming can only rely on luck to search everywhere. Flying like this, Li Ming can only rely on his sensing ability to discover things that may be valuable to him on the dark planet. Time has passed little by little, and Li Ming has forgotten how long he has been flying. The mountains under him have disappeared, replaced by an endless desert. The desert here is different from the deserts on other planets. The whole is dark red. Under the illumination of starlight, these dark reds are very obvious. Occasionally, a huge rock can be seen in the desert. These rocks are very similar to crystal stones, with a smooth surface and red. Looking from a high altitude, the rocks are like red starlight in the desert. The red rocks are more dazzling than the desert, but Li Ming did not approach easily. He just observed roughly from a high altitude. Even if it needs to be observed carefully, it is enough to have a flying dragon. But just as Li Ming was flying and exploring like this, a rumbling sound came from deep in the desert, as if something was shaking the earth. Chapter 342. Want to take action? The rumbling sound continued to reach his ears, and the earth was shaking a little bit. Even if he was in the sky, he could feel the vibration. Li Ming paused slightly, feeling the huge movement, and at the same time, he raised his eyes slightly and looked in the direction where the sound came from. The sound came from the left-hand side of Li Ming, not directly in front of him. Because the distance was too far, Li Ming could not see anything clearly, but he could occasionally see some bright lights, as if many people were fighting. Li Ming looked in that direction, hesitated slightly, turned around, and flew over there. Moving forward little by little in the darkness, as he slowly approached, the place where the vibration occurred gradually became clear. A giant was facing more than a dozen aliens at the same time, as if he was fighting with the aliens. Li Ming did not really approach, but just looked from a distance. Li Ming did not want to easily get involved in this kind of fighting situation. After observing for a few seconds, he waved his right hand and the flying dragon flew directly over. It was undoubtedly the best way to get close to see what was going on with the flying dragon. The flying dragon flashed away, and Li Ming slowly fell back to the ground. The flying dragon approached just like Li Ming's real body approached. All his feelings and perceptions were extremely clear, and the whole situation became clear. This 1,000-meter high giant was not unfamiliar. It was the silicon-based life giant that Li Ming had encountered before. Why did this giant appear on Hangaya Star? Was it a wild beast or something else? Li Ming didn't know, but one thing was certain, that is, this huge silicon-based life was extremely powerful. Despite the joint siege of more than a dozen aliens, the giant was still intact, just like fighting with more than a dozen flies. The surface of the giant was a crystal block that emitted a faint light. It looked extremely hard, like a natural armor. This was also something that all silicon-based life was born with. From a distance, it looked like a pile of glass fragments of different colors. Such a giant's behavior was earth-shattering, and no alien would fight with it for no reason. But the dozen aliens in front of him kept surrounding the giant, neither attacking with all their strength nor retreating, just pulling each other back and forth. Thilang continued to approach, and shuttle back and forth among them. Li Ming found something strange about these aliens. Because Thilang also has the ability to explore consciousness, like a moving eye, Li Ming can also learn some key information from the thoughts of these aliens. These aliens are divided into two groups. One is the Hua Alliance and the other is the Huff Alliance. There was originally a conflict between the two sides, but now in front of the giant, the two aliens have no intention of fighting, just defending one side and pulling the giant against each other. However, when Li Ming used his eye to check the information in these people's brains, a piece of information about Red Ren was suddenly discovered. This information made Li Ming's body excited, and he opened his mouth and whispered involuntarily, "Red Ren." As Li Ming's eye saw, the reason why these people were entangled with this giant beast was related to Red Wren. Long learned from the brain of a first-level civilization on the Huai Alliance side that a red wren was originally found here, but it was blocked by the Huff Alliance before it was obtained, so the two sides fought because of this. While the two sides were fighting, a giant suddenly appeared and swallowed the object containing the red wren into its stomach, so the two sides were entangled with the giant. Seeing this information, Li Ming couldn't help but shake his head slightly and whispered again, "Red wren was eaten by the giant? How can we get it?" Talking to himself, Li Ming couldn't help but sigh slightly, with a look of hesitation and thought on his face, and his eyes couldn't help but look in the direction of the giant. Should he go there? Or leave and search alone? Li Ming began to be a little entangled, which was also the reason why Li Ming was hesitating at the moment. If he left and went to another place to search alone, he would naturally avoid a lot of trouble, but Li Ming had been searching alone for a long time and had no clue at all and got nothing. But if he approached the giant beast and waited for an opportunity in secret, it seemed that it would be okay. From the information Li Ming had discovered, these aliens all wanted to get the red wren, but they also faced two problems. One was how to kill the giant, and the other was how to get rid of each other. But since they all wanted to get the red wren, there would be a result in the end, so Li Ming had to approach quietly and wait for the opportunity. Li Ming flew slowly along the low altitude. He didn't want to be discovered by the aliens or the giants, so he could only hide his body as much as possible. In the desert, the only places to hide were those huge rocks. Li Ming could only keep moving his body back and forth between those rocks to slowly approach. The aliens and the giants kept fighting. Sometimes it was the sound of the giants, and sometimes it was the trembling of the earth. The scene was relatively chaotic. In such a situation, these people had no intention of distracting their attention to other places, so Li Ming's infiltration was also very smooth. Unknowingly, Li Ming was only a few hundred meters away from the giant, which was already a very close distance. Li Ming's position was in the middle. Although he was close to the giant's attention was only on the aliens on both sides, so Li Ming's position was still safe. At this time, Li Ming didn't need to move. He quietly hid behind the boulder, and then let Long observe the battle situation. Li Ming only had to wait for an opportunity. The tug of war between the two sides continued, but a good-headed alien from the He-Fu Alliance suddenly paused, and looked around with sharp eyes, as if he was looking for something. Finally, he locked onto the boulder where Li Ming was hiding. "Melvin, what are you daydreaming about?" Another alien suddenly turned his eyes and said to the good-headed alien. The alien named Melvin hurriedly bowed to the person who was speaking and then said, "Lord Mercer, there is someone over there." Huh. Mercer turned his eyes and looked at the location Melvin mentioned. There was nothing unusual there, except a huge rock, which made Mercer turn his head and look at Melvin with a puzzled look. Melvin hurriedly continued, "I'm a spiritual civilization, and my perception will definitely not be wrong." Mercer looked at the location of the rock again, and at the same time, his eyes showed a cold color. After a light snort, he raised his right hand, and the center of his palm wrapped in metal armor suddenly flashed red, and a laser shot out. Li Ming, who was behind the rock, also sensed this in advance. He said "fuck" and flew into the air. However, as soon as Li Ming flew away, a loud boom sounded from that place. After the red light, the entire rock was instantly smashed into pieces. The power was really strong. Although Li Ming avoided the attack, he was furious. He had been hiding well, but he was almost killed by this person. His cold eyes immediately focused on Mercer. But at this time, all the other aliens also looked at Li Ming. These people had not noticed Li Ming's existence before, so Li Ming's sudden appearance also surprised everyone. Among them, the people on the Huai Alliance side had different expressions after seeing Li Ming, and whispered, "This guy, isn't this guy the new guy who joined the Tillmans? Why is he here too? Oh right. Didn't Commander Abel say that he should report this guy immediately?" The people from the Hef Alliance also stared at Li Ming, but most of them had bad intentions. Among them, Mercer said directly, "He is from the Huai Alliance. He can only do some sneaky things. Fortunately, we have a spiritual civilization like Melvin, otherwise there will be some trouble." Li Ming took in all the conversation information. On the Hua Alliance side, Li Ming just glanced at it with disdain, but on the Heth Alliance side, Li Ming showed anger. He looked at Melvin, and then looked at Mercer. Melvin is a spiritual civilization, a first level civilization. Mercer is a technological civilization, a 1.2 level civilization. In addition to these two people, there are some other members of the Heth Alliance, but most of them are first level civilizations, and only a few are 1.1 level civilizations. Judging from the level of civilization, Mercer is undoubtedly the leader of this group of people, but what he said just now made Li Ming very unhappy. Li Ming's disgust for him was written all over his face. Even though the opponent was a level 1.2 civilization, Li Ming had a chance of winning, but there were many other civilizations around him, so it was still a bit troublesome to kill him alone. Li Ming's glare was naturally noticed by Moser, who looked at Li Ming with disdain at this moment. However, Li Ming's expression of dissatisfaction made Moser instantly unhappy. After another cold snort, he looked at Li Ming and said, "What? Do you want to fight me?" Li Ming just glared at the other party and did not speak. Chapter 343, Self-Knowledge. Moser looked at Li Ming's angry eyes, and after sensing that Li Ming was only a first level civilization, he couldn't help but chuckle. After looking at Li Ming with disdain, he shook his head lightly and said contemptuously, "Boy, don't look at me with that unconvinced look. You are not qualified. If it weren't for the Galaxy War Treaty, a guy with such a look would have been a corpse long ago." The Galaxy War Treaty is a joint statement treaty formulated by many advanced civilizations in the Milky Way since the end of the last galactic war. Once a galactic war is about to break out, conflicts and frictions between the respective alliances must be avoided as much as possible. Otherwise, when the galactic war breaks out, the alliance will be isolated. Li Ming was already furious at this time. If it was a low-level civilization in the past, Li Ming might be able to tolerate it, but hearing these words now, how could Li Ming tolerate it? He stared at the other person and said clearly word by word, "You mean, you can kill me at any time?" Hearing this, Mercer's face instantly turned cold, and his eyes focused on Li Ming. At the same time, he leaned forward, as if ready to take action. But before Mercer really took action, Melvin suddenly stepped forward, blocked Mercer with one hand, and whispered, "Lord Mercer." As he spoke, he shook his head slightly, signaling Mercer not to take action. Seeing this, Mercer was angry, but he still suppressed it. At this time, Melvin turned around and looked at Li Ming with his feminine fox eyes. Before he said anything, he directly pooed the ground beside him. Then he said, "If you have a little self-knowledge, get out of here." As soon as the voice fell, the giant who was still fighting with the aliens also looked at Li Ming at this moment and showed a puzzled look, blinking his eyes slightly, as if thinking about something. But at this moment, Li Ming only had Mercer and Melvin in his eyes. Seeing that Melvin was about to turn around and return to the crowd, Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly, and his figure flashed and disappeared on the spot. Instantaneous. With a light sound of snap, Li Ming's figure suddenly appeared in front of Melvin, and he grabbed the other's neck with one hand. The speed was so fast that it exceeded the vision of all aliens. Li Ming's appearance was like appearing out of thin air. This sudden appearance made the surrounding aliens retreat 2 steps, and even Mercer couldn't help but take a step back. Everyone showed a surprised expression, because they had never seen such a teleportation ability. Li Ming looked at Melvin in front of him with cold eyes, and his hand was gradually exerting force, and the golden arc was also flashing around his palm, making a crackling sound. Melvin could only cough dryly and stammer, and couldn't say a word. "I don't have any self-knowledge, but you can't be without." The cold voice in his mouth was clearly heard by everyone. He raised his eyes slightly and looked at Melvin with disdain, and then suddenly exerted force with his right hand. Bang! Lightning and sparks scattered, and under the intense energy, Melvin was directly annihilated, as if Li Ming had just crushed a balloon. With this muffled sound, everyone opened their eyes wide and looked at Li Ming with fear. Melvin is a first-level civilization, the same as Li Ming. At the same time, Melvin is a rare spiritual civilization. At this level, the sensing ability of spiritual civilization is stronger, and it should be more likely to sense danger in advance, but this person was killed by Li Ming's blow. He slowly retracted his right hand and rubbed it from the clothes on his chest. The action was as if his hand had just been stained with something dirty and needed to be rubbed clean on the clothes. While doing so, a pair of eyes looked at Mercer coldly. Seeing Li Ming's eyes, Mercer was angry and frightened. He was angry because Li Ming killed Melvin, and Melvin was a rare advanced spiritual civilization. This was a huge loss for the entire alliance, but the means Li Ming showed just now were indeed surprising. Boy, you. The angry Mercer didn't know what to say for a moment. His body moved slightly, his teeth were tightly clenched, his two arms suddenly shook, his palms clenched into fists, and suddenly the surface of his whole body flashed, and a layer of red and blue armor appeared. As soon as the whole set of armor appeared, Mercer was like a robot. The surface of the armor emitted a faint light and looked extremely hard, but the armor as a whole was very soft, like wearing a tight suit. The armor of advanced technological civilization is an integrated attack and defense, especially this kind of close-fitting equipment, which is the most cutting-edge technology and often has amazing power and defense. Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly, grabbed with his right hand, and the golden arc between his 5 fingers flashed and jumped again, and raised his hand to throw it at the other party. This electric current is very powerful. Although it is not as powerful as Biggs's super lightning, it is powerful enough to kill ordinary creatures. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and a semicircular white shield suddenly appeared in front of Mercer. The electric current hit it, like hitting a drum, making a low muffled sound. Such a strong current not only did not cause any harm to Mercer, but was directly absorbed by his shield. With his wisdom eyes, this was very clear. Li Ming frowned slightly and thought to himself, it was actually absorbed. In a certain sense, technological civilization is more restrained by intelligent civilization, especially the elemental and energy attacks of intelligent civilization. This is mainly due to the fact that the technology of technological civilization can absorb energy, just like the star furnace shield on Li Ming. The star furnace was originally produced in a low-level technological civilization, and its absorption of energy is relatively slow, and it can generate a shield that absorbs energy. Now that it has reached a high-level civilization, the technology is no longer the same as before, and powerful energy can be absorbed instantly. After resisting Li Ming's attack, Mercer sneered and pushed his right palm towards Li Ming. The palm of his hand flashed red. Bang! A loud noise was heard, and a red aurora shot out from his palm, but a golden shield had already formed in front of Li Ming, and the red and golden shields collided with each other. The powerful energy wave spread out, like a shock wave spreading all around in an instant. The golden shield in front of Li Ming made a squeaking sound, followed by a thrust approaching him, which made Li Ming retreat, as if he was blown away by the wind, and stopped only tens of meters away. At this time, Li Ming looked at the other party again, and his brows could not help but frown slightly. This 1.2 level civilization is indeed much stronger than the 1.1 level civilization. According to the advanced energy calculation, 11.1 requires 2 flowing cloud forces, and 1.11.2 requires 3 flowing cloud forces. According to this calculation, Moses' energy is almost the same as Li Ming. Li Ming's eyes were fixed on the other party, and his mind was already thinking about countermeasures. Since it can absorb energy, then we can only fight in close combat. Li Ming whispered to himself, his eyes narrowed, and never left the opponent's body. At the same time, Li Ming's eyeballs had turned into green triangles, which was the use of the 6 domains to strengthen the star. But at this moment, the giant not far from Li Ming suddenly bent down slightly, staring at Li Ming with his eyes like observing an ant, and said, I remember, the guy who woke me up before, it was you. Upon hearing this voice, Li Ming paused, turned his head slightly, glanced at the giant, his expression shrank slightly, and frowned again. Without waiting for Li Ming to do anything, the giant suddenly raised his foot angrily and stepped directly at Li Ming and said viciously, "Go to hell." The huge sole of the foot fell from the sky, and Li Ming had no time to think and flew away. Boom. A deafening roar was heard, and the ground trembled. It was even difficult to stand within 100 meters. The huge feet crushed the ground into pieces, and the dust flew. The giant did not stop after missing the attack. A big hand grabbed the air, just like grabbing a mosquito flying in the air. Li Ming's face changed slightly, and he quickly moved to dodge. Although the giant was powerful, His attack speed was relatively slow, so Li Ming could easily avoid it. However, there was also a problem. Although the giant could not do anything to Li Ming could not do anything to the other party either. This was undoubtedly very disadvantageous to Li Ming at the moment. Chapter 344 Super Flying Dragon. The giant suddenly attacked Li Ming, and attacked crazily, as if he had locked onto him. This startled the aliens around him. Both the Huai Alliance and the Huff Alliance were puzzled. Mercer also noticed this at this moment, and his puzzled expression turned into deep thought. He looked at the giant and Li Ming with his eyes. In front of the powerful giant, Li Ming could only dodge around, and had no power to resist. After watching for a while, Mercer smiled slightly, as if he saw an opportunity, and flew directly into the air. Although Li Ming dodged around, he was at ease. Mercer's actions were even more under his control. Seeing Mercer flying towards him, Li Ming's eyes narrowed slightly, and with a wave of his right hand, a white sword appeared. Mercer did not approach Li Ming, but just watched from a distance, and the giant ignored Mercer's existence at all. His angry eyes stared at Li Ming closely, and he flew over with a roar. The two huge palms slapped back and forth, and Li Ming could only dodge back and forth. Just after Li Ming dodged a giant palm, a red light suddenly flashed. With his spiritual civilization ability, Li Ming foresaw it in advance. He swung his right hand violently, and after a light sound of snap, the lightsaber flashed with his arm, blocking the red light. Before Li Ming could react again, the giant's palm slapped down again. Li Ming's face changed slightly, and he quickly retreated to avoid it. However, as soon as Li Ming dodged, the red light attacked again. Li Ming was shocked, and could only use the lightsaber to block it again. Under the bonus of the 6th domain enhanced star, Li Ming's wisdom ability has been greatly improved, so his induction ability is also extremely strong. While avoiding the giant's attack, he can also avoid Moser's attack, but this undoubtedly made Li Ming's nerves always tense, and he dared not relax at all. Although Moser did not approach Li Ming, he had been shooting cold guns from a distance, which was also extremely disadvantageous to Li Ming. Looking at the giant in front of him, he attacked him like a madman, which made Li Ming unable to deal with one person wholeheartedly, and was always in a passive state. If we continue like this, we will be too passive. Li Ming whispered fiercely to himself. His frowning brows, slightly open mouth, and stern expression were always in a state of tension. His eyes had to look at the giant from time to time, and also keep an eye on Mercer. His eyeballs moved slightly, and the green corners of his eyes suddenly lit up slightly, as if he had thought of something. His body suddenly turned, and he dodged another slap from the giant, after flipping in the air. However, this time Li Ming did not retreat, but fell on the back of the palm that had just slapped him. Then Li Ming hurriedly ran along the giant's arm to the giant's shoulder. Standing on the giant's arm and running fast, with the giant's other palm on one side and Mercer's attack on the other side, Li Ming's feet were like wheels running fast on the giant's arm. The giant's eyes turned east, and looked at Li Ming running on his arm. Then he raised his left hand and slapped his right arm. It felt like a bug ran on a person's body, and he naturally had to use his other hand to slap it to death. The huge hand came directly over, and Li Ming had already noticed it. At the same time, his body had already started to activate energy, and the surface of his body flashed with electric light, as if he was a generator, with white light shining and current surging. When the giant's left hand fell, the white light on Li Ming's body flashed, and with a muffled sound of bang, Li Ming suddenly turned from one person to two people, as if one Li Ming suddenly became two Li Mings. One continued to run along the current arm, while the other turned over, and came to the giant's left hand, and ran up along the left hand. The appearance of Li Ming on both arms at the same time, made the giant confused. He looked around, and was at a loss. Even Moser, who was far away, was startled. He originally raised his arm to attack, but when he saw the two Li Mings, his expression changed, and he looked surprised. He didn't know which one to attack with the raised arm. The appearance of the two Li Mings was because Li Ming used the ability of the elemental clone. In a moment, the Li Ming on the right arm had reached the shoulder. With a sudden force of his feet, he leaped to the top of the giant's head. Li Ming on the left arm was still running, while Li Ming on the right arm was already standing on the giant's head. At the same time, he raised his right hand high above his head, with his palm facing up. At this time, green light was flashing on Li Ming's right palm, like a ball of green flame. The giant glanced at Li Ming on his left arm, and his eyes suddenly raised, as if he wanted to look at the top of his head. Obviously, he had felt that there was something on his head. He didn't care about Li Ming on his left arm, and slowly raised his left and right hands and slapped them directly on his head, just to get rid of Li Ming on his head first. At this time, Li Ming's right palm was full of green flames. The flames did not burn naturally like ordinary flames, but burst out and burn like lightning. The green flames spread everywhere in irregular shapes and expanded instantly. From a distance, it seemed as if there was a green flame burning on the giant's head. Looking at the two big hands that were slapping, Li Ming suddenly shouted and slapped the palms on the giant's head. The scene was like slapping the flames on the palms on the giant's head. The palm of his hand firmly hit the top of the giant's head, which was full of crystal blocks. Under the pressure, the green flames scattered, and the flames spun to form a violently burning green vortex, which then soared into the sky. After a while, it gathered to form a huge green dragon. The shadow of the green dragon was more than 10 meters long. After circling, it suddenly turned down and pierced into the giant's brain along Li Ming's palm. This green dragon was Li Ming's flying dragon ability, which was all formed by Li Ming's consciousness. Compared with the previous small green dragon, its ability was more powerful, like Li Ming's consciousness clone. The appearance of the green dragon also startled the aliens around. This kind of consciousness is completely different from something formed completely by energy. Not to mention the aliens of ordinary civilization. Even the aliens of spiritual civilization find it difficult to do this. As the green dragon entered the giant's brain, the two big hands that were about to slap it suddenly stopped, and the giant's eyes opened violently. The eyes were wide open, as if the eyeballs were about to bulge out of the eye sockets and fall out, and the bloodshot on the eyeballs was clearly visible. The two big hands suddenly turned and slapped the sides of the giant's head, as if covering his ears, and his whole face was full of pain. "Ah! My head. My head hurts so much." The giant screamed at the top of his lungs, holding his head with both hands, and began to shake it around, while Li Ming stood up and jumped away from the giant's head. Looking at the giant, his expression was indifferent. At this moment, the giant could no longer pose a threat to Li Ming, which made Li Ming's eyes turn to Mercer. Mercer's eyes met Li Ming's, and his figure suddenly froze, as if he had seen something terrifying. But he did not show too much fear, gritted his teeth fiercely, and ran straight towards Li Ming. Li Ming also snorted and flew down. While he was still in the air, the lightsaber in his right hand had already formed, and Mercer raised both hands together, and the palms of his two hands flashed red at the same time, like two cannon barrels, and then a strange sound of kai 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 was heard. Red light shot out from his palm, and lasers flew straight towards Li Ming. Li Ming continued to approach the opponent, while dodging the red lasers, and occasionally swung the lightsaber to block the opponent's attack. Red and white lights kept flashing in front of Li Ming, and the sparks after the energy collision could only be seen from a distance, which was already very bright in the night sky. Li Ming's slightly narrowed eyes had locked onto Mercer. Hushan's eyes were activating a certain ability, and he said to himself in his mind, "This distance should be fine." Li Ming, who was originally flying towards Mercer, suddenly disappeared from the spot with a bang. The next second, Li Ming's figure was already in front of Mercer. "Ah!" Mercer suddenly exclaimed, and just as he saw Li Ming's face clearly, the lightsaber had already slashed down directly. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and Mercer's body surface formed the previous shield again, but the attack power of the lightsaber was different from the arc. The powerful cutting force directly split the shield and slashed onto Mercer's armor. A burst of starlight emanated from Mercer's body, like the sparks produced by the collision of two metals. Mercer's body fell rapidly under the impact. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345. Only one person. A scratch appeared on the armor on Mercer's chest, but it was not a big deal. Li Ming succeeded in his attack and immediately pursued him. Mercer was surprised and swung his right hand. A red light flashed in his palm and a beam of light shot out from his palm. However, this beam of light did not shoot out directly, but stopped in Mercer's hand, forming a red lightsaber. Mercer intended to attack with a red laser, but Li Ming, who attacked again, did not give the opponent this opportunity. In desperation, Mercer could only take out the red lightsaber. Snap! A sound was heard, and the red light and the white light collided with each other. The collision of the two swords was not too strange, just like the collision of two beams of light. With a ferocious face, Mercer gnashed his teeth and said, "Want to kill me? You can't do it." Hehe. Li Ming looked at the opponent's red lightsaber with an indifferent expression. His face was extremely gloomy. With the bonus of a 6 domain enhanced star, Li Ming's lightsaber was already very powerful, but it was still useless to Mercer, a 1.2 level civilization. His right hand suddenly retracted and attacked again. Mercer was also shocked when he saw this, and hurriedly continued to wave the red lightsaber to resist. Suddenly, two figures were seen changing and attacking each other in the air, and the red and white lightsabers intertwined and flashed with each other, but for a while, no one could do anything to the other. At this time, the giant in the distance was still holding his head and roaring, with a ferocious face full of pain, but after a moment, the giant suddenly paused and stood still, and his dull eyes also froze. The two huge arms unconsciously lowered slowly, and the entire giant stood still without moving. Li Ming's clone on the top of the giant's head then breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Li Ming's body who was fighting. The giant could no longer move under the influence of Li Ming's powerful mental power and was subdued by Li Ming's mental consciousness. Simply put, the giant's consciousness was defeated by Li Ming's consciousness that invaded his brain. The Azure Dragon turned into Li Ming's figure in the giant's brain and floated slowly, just like in a small space. But under this floating, some extremely interesting information kept emerging. That kind of information was like a picture floating in the giant's consciousness, and each picture was a memory. Looking at these pictures floating like leaves, Li Ming raised his hand and lightly tapped, and one of them quickly stopped. The stopped picture stood still in front of Li Ming, like a video that was paused halfway through, but now it has started to play again. The content inside is about the past of this giant, and Li Ming couldn't help but be brought into it as he watched. Li Ming's consciousness in the giant's brain began to watch the content, while Li Ming's main body outside was fighting fiercely with Mercer. Li Ming's clone on the giant in the distance was about to join the main body's battle, but just as he was about to leave, the situation farther away suddenly caught the attention of Li Ming's clone. Deep in the night sky, a large number of aliens were flying towards this side from the air in two directions. There were not many people on both sides, 3 on one side and 5 on the other side. Li Ming's clone saw it very clearly. The 3 people were the 3 major forces of the Huai Alliance, Abel, Xenia, and Yeager, while the 5 people were the 3 major forces of the Huff Alliance and 2 other members, including Biggs who was fighting with Li Ming. The sudden arrival of these people made Li Ming's main body startled. The battle in his hands had stopped, and he retreated to a distance. Mercer also slowly retreated and looked around. With a simple glance, Mercer looked at the direction of the 5 people with a look of joy on his face, and his eyes were extremely proud. He whispered, "Leader Tweak." Among the 5 new aliens, the leader was Leader Tweak. Naturally, his eyes quickly noticed Mercer, but after just a glance, he turned his gaze to Abel opposite. Abel looked at Li Ming with full concentration, and then looked at Tweak fiercely. The 2 leaders showed their momentum and inner fluctuations with just a glance. Even if they didn't say much, their attitudes were still very clear. Mercer looked at Tweak with a serious face, glanced at Li Ming angrily, and said, "Alliance leader, this is the man who killed Melvin." Tweak's expression changed slightly, and his eyes slowly moved to Li Ming. His eyeballs moved slightly, and he looked at Li Ming. At this time, Biggs, who was standing next to Tweak, whispered hurriedly, "This is the man I was talking about. Now that Yarborough and his men are here, it's better to stop." Tweak didn't say a word, and his eyes looked at Li Ming with a little strangeness, but he just looked at him a few more times, then looked at Mercer again and said, "What are you still standing there for? Let's go." Mercer was stunned when he heard this, and his face showed doubts. His eyes then looked at Yarborough in the distance. In the end, he could only snort angrily, glanced at Li Ming, and said contemptuously, "You are lucky today." After saying this, Mercer was ready to turn around and leave. But at this moment, Li Ming's clone suddenly flashed and blocked his way. As soon as this action appeared, everyone was shocked, and all eyes turned to the two Li Mings. Moser also rolled his eyes slightly, and glanced at Li Ming's original body and clone, and said in a low voice, "What do you mean by this?" Li Ming's original body did not say a word, and at the same time, the original body and the clone were getting closer to each other in the air, and a white arc net appeared between the two. Li Ming's original body and clone seemed to be standing still, but the arc between the two seemed to have traction, and kept pulling the two together, and after a few seconds, they completely merged, and the two Li Mings were combined into one. Everyone saw this scene, because they were all advanced civilizations, and naturally understood some advanced abilities. This ability of clones and synthesis was undoubtedly a rare ability in intelligent civilizations, and anyone who saw it could not help but envy and surprise. After the two merged into one, Li Ming's energy was also greatly improved. He looked at Chiaburo with his eyes, and then looked at Twek. Some information related to his own advantages and disadvantages under the wisdom eye ability had emerged. With a cold expression, he finally focused on Mercer and said, "Today, between you and me, only one person can leave alive." Huh. Mercer's face changed, and his eyes stared at Li Ming, already full of anger. At this time, Li Ming was even more murderous, and Netung's green breath had begun to spread on his body. Mercer naturally couldn't see what means Li Ming was going to use. After a cold snort, his two palms suddenly stood side by side in front of him, and a pair of palms pointed at Li Ming, saying, "Since you are looking for death." Mercer had just said half of his words, when Li Ming suddenly grabbed the air with his right hand, and the green breath on his body flew out. Seeing this, Biggs couldn't help but widened his eyes a little and exclaimed, "Not good." But it was too late. The green breath swept in like green smoke, and in just a moment, Mercer was entangled by the green smoke. Looking at the inexplicable green smoke on his body, Moser was at a loss, not knowing what it was. He only felt that the breath surrounded him, as if he was just in a ball of green mist, nothing unusual. But the next moment, Li Ming's palm suddenly clenched hard. Bang! A powerful muffled sound was heard, and the green mist burst out. At the moment when the green mist burst out, the green suddenly became more intense, engulfing Moser's entire figure. Tweek's body shook when he saw this scene. His eyes widened a little, his expression became more severe, and he looked at Li Ming from time to time, while Biggs looked at the green mist with concern. Li Ming had a calm look, but his face was slightly pale, which was the reason for the excessive consumption of energy in his body. Although the use of the artifact consumes a lot of energy, Li Ming also consumed a lot of energy in the previous battle, so he was slightly weak after using the artifact. Even though Li Ming was a little weak now, he was not too worried, because Li Ming had seen through the thoughts of Abel and others. The purpose of these people coming here was to win over Li Ming, so even though he was very weak now, he was not worried about Twik and others. Chapter 346 Secret. The green mist dissipated little by little, and Mercer's appearance gradually became clear. At this time, Mercer was like a hedgehog, with sharp thorns all over his body. The thorns did not penetrate Mercer's body from the outside, but stabbed out of Mercer's body from his body. Just like Mercer's body suddenly grew thorns. Thorns are also one of the abilities of the artifact Mugsunateng, and their power is extraordinary. Mercer's armor was full of holes and cracks, and each thorn that stabbed out of his body was covered with blood. Even the head had several thorns. The green mist became thinner and thinner, and gradually disappeared in the air, and Mercer could only fall to the ground. Watching Mercer gradually fall into the desert under the night sky, Tweek clenched his fists, and stared at Li Ming fiercely. It seemed that the anger in his heart could no longer be suppressed. He moved and went straight to Li Ming. Li Ming's eyes turned, and he noticed something strange in advance. Just when he was about to do something, a black shadow flashed in front of him, and then a bang sounded in his ears. A loud bang was heard. The black alien Jija appeared in the distance in front of Li Ming, holding a huge black blade in one hand, blocking Tweek's fist. The black light slowly spread from the point of contact between the fist and the blade. There was no shocking shockwave, only a circle of spreading energy. Tweek still had a calm expression, his eyes slightly turned to Jija in front of him, and he couldn't help but blurt out a few words. Jija. Jija's ferocious face didn't have much expression. He just stared at the other party and said, "Leader Tweak, are you going to go to war with our Huai Alliance?" Tweak suddenly laughed coldly at this time, without saying much. The two looked at each other with hostility and anger, but after a few seconds of confrontation, they retreated to a distance. Tweak looked at Yeager in front of him, then looked at Abel in the distance, and said, "The galactic war is about to come. Don't let that kid die easily, because he must die in my hands." Hehe. There was no smile on his face, but he laughed like this, and while laughing, his body turned and walked away. As Tweak left, the other members of the Huff Alliance also began to retreat away from this place. Soon, only the members of the Huai Alliance were left here. Abel and others immediately flew to Li Ming's side, and the three of them kept looking at Li Ming. Abel looked at the people of the Huff Alliance who had already moved away, and then returned his gaze to Li Ming. After a slight smile, he said, "Li Ming, did you gain anything from the trip to Hangyu Star?" Li Ming smiled lightly, shook his head slightly, and said nothing more. Abel nodded slightly, hesitated for a moment, and said, "There are many rare items on this ruby planet, but it is not easy to find them, and we can't stay on this planet for long. Once the time is up, we need to leave quickly. After all, there are many unstable volcanoes on Ruby Planet. They have certain active patterns, so no matter whether there is any harvest or not, we should leave this place as much as possible when the time is up." Li Ming looked enlightened, and then nodded and said, "So that's how it is." Abel smiled again and said, "It's very close to the active period of the volcano. If you don't have any other harvest, then follow me to the teleportation array, so that we can leave here together." Li Ming was stunned when he heard this. Although he saw the other party's thoughts, Li Ming still pretended to be confused and said, "Leave here together?" At this time, Yeager suddenly waved his hand, put away the black sword, and smiled. "It's like this. In the energy duel on Isaiah Star, your performance was exceptionally outstanding. Commander Abel and several senior executives of our alliance have discussed it privately, and are preparing to transfer you to the Huai Alliance headquarters." "Oh." Li Ming pretended to be shocked and looked at the three people in front of him again. Seeing this, Abel waved his hand, and said with a smile, "This is not the place to talk. Let's talk about this in detail after we return to Isaiah." Li Ming nodded slightly, his face showing hesitation. He looked back at the giant, who was still standing there, and then replied, "Okay, let's talk about this when we return to Isaiah, but I still have some things to deal with right now, so it shouldn't delay the return trip." Abel followed Li Ming's gaze and looked at the standing giant. After nodding slightly, he raised his hand and handed over a round metal sphere, saying, "This is the coordinates of our teleportation array. We will wait for you there." Li Ming smiled slightly and happily took the silver metal ball. Seeing Li Ming take it, Abel looked at Xenia and Jija beside him with satisfaction and said, "Let's go back to the teleportation array first." With that, the three of them turned around and were about to leave. The conversation between Li Ming and the three people was seen by the members of the Huai Alliance on the ground. These people also came from various star systems of the Huai Alliance, but seeing that Li Ming was so close to Yarborough, they could only show doubts and envy. Li Ming stayed where he was, watching Yarborough and the other two gradually disappear in the night sky. Then he looked at the metal ball in his hand, with a look of thinking about something else. Li Ming had already mastered Yarborough's thoughts, so he didn't have to worry about it. But Li Ming also had his own ideas. After thinking for a while, he clenched his right hand and put away the silver metal ball in his palm. He turned and flew towards the giant. Li Ming didn't stop until he reached the top of the giant's head. He looked around and first looked at the members of the Huai Alliance who had not left, but he didn't care and just leaned over and sat down. The aliens of the Huai Alliance below were all puzzled and talked about it. These people knew that the giant swallowed Hang Ren, but seeing Li Ming like this, they were a little at a loss. However, after a brief discussion, these people could only disperse and leave. No matter what Li Ming talked about with Yarborough, and no matter why Li Ming stayed here, based on Li Ming's previous fighting strength, these people did not dare to offend easily, so leaving was the best choice. Li Ming just glanced at these people and slowly closed his eyes. Now Li Ming needs to restore the energy in his body and also needs to take back the flying dragon in the giant's brain. Li Ming has a lot of nebula pills, but this pill is no longer suitable for Li Ming's level, so Li Ming needs a better pill to replace it. After all, it is too critical in battle. After taking several nebula pills in a row, Li Ming began to take back his flying dragon consciousness. The flying dragon consciousness obtained a lot of information from the giant's brain. This information is very important to Li Ming, and it is also the biggest gain of Li Ming's trip to Hangaya Star. Of course, this is also an unexpected gain. Li Ming initially used the flying dragon just to suppress the giant, but he didn't expect that the giant's brain actually had such important information. Green light reappeared above the giant's head, as if a light was turned on above the giant's head, and Li Ming was in the green light. After a few seconds, a shadowy green dragon flew out of it. From a distance, it looked like the green dragon flew out of Li Ming's body. The green dragon flew straight into the sky, circled for a while, and then flew down. Its long body slowly rotated around Li Ming, and entered Li Ming's body little by little. After taking back the flying dragon, Li Ming opened his eyes slightly, showing a slight smile, and then stood up. He looked at the giant again with his eyes, shook his head slightly, as if sighing, and whispered, "Although Hangren is extremely important to me, taking Hangren out of your body will inevitably hurt your life, and Hangren also has some effect on you." As he spoke, Li Ming's body slowly floated into the air. After looking at the giant again with his eyes, he sighed softly and left directly. Now Li Ming is going to the teleportation array according to the silver metal ball in his hand. The metal ball records the detailed coordinates and location of the teleportation array, and he can fly according to the route above. As his body continued to fly, Li Ming's mind was already thinking about the information he had just obtained. This information included the origin of the giant and the secrets of Ringsu, so it was extremely important to Li Ming. Chapter 347 Larson, Mayo. Watching these memories is like flipping through videos in Li Ming's mind. He can watch whatever he wants, and wherever he wants. First of all, the origin of the giant. The information here is also very important to Li Ming. According to the memory screen in the giant's brain, this giant comes from Isaiah, and is also a silicon-based life on Isaiah. The giant's name is Larson, and he was also an important figure on Isaiah a long time ago. There are two civilizations of silicon-based life on Isaiah. One is the power civilization headed by Abel, and the other is the biological civilization headed by Larson. Although they are two civilizations, they are very united as silicon-based life, so they can coexist peacefully on Isaiah. During the period when Larson dominated the biological civilization of Isaiah, he mainly focused on synthesis ability, and had been deeply researching advanced materials. Of course, Moore was once Larson's pet. At the same time, there is something, the sixth domain Manxing Hukang, which is related to Larson. Li Ming cares about this sixth domain Manxing Hukang very much, because this is also the ability that Li Ming needs to obtain. According to the memory, Larson placed the sixth domain Manxing Hukang star book at the base of the biological civilization of Isaiah Star, and the specific location was also very clear. This was even more important to Li Ming, so Li Ming had to remember the location of this star book deeply. In addition to this star book, there was another extremely important memory for Li Ming, which was about Ringsu. Ringsu is a material for interval advancement. If you get this item and match it with the required power of flowing clouds, you can directly advance to the next interval. Simply put, if Li Ming has one Ringsu, he can directly advance from the first level civilization to the 1.3 level civilization. If he has 3 Ringsu, Li Ming can directly reach the 1.9 level civilization. Therefore, the importance of Ringsu can be imagined. Ringsu is also a naturally generated item on the universe, but it is extremely rare, even a legendary item. After all, the advanced material of Hangren is already a rare item, and the interval advanced material of Ringsu is naturally even rarer. But in order to get this item, Larson began to study it. Larson's goal is divided into two parts. One is to synthesize Ringsu, and the other is to synthesize something similar to Ringsu. Only with these two things can the goal of interval advancement be achieved. From Larson's memory, it is known that there are two core members of this research. One is Larson, a silicon-based life, and the other is a non-silicon-based life guy named Mayo. After years of research and development, the two people really found a way to synthesize Ringsu. The synthesis of Rinxu is divided into two parts. Larsen is responsible for the upper part and Mayo is responsible for the lower part. The two people splice together to form a complete formula for synthesizing Rinxu. In Larsen's memory, this method and material formula are also completely found. This method and formula are the most precious information in Larsen's memory, and it is also Li Ming's excitement. Li Ming wrote down the information of the method and formula separately for later use. But when looking at Larsen's subsequent memories, Li Ming still frowned and showed a puzzled look. Because when synthesizing Rinxu, Larsen and Mayo synthesized a total of 2, 1 each, and entered the next interval together, but Mayo successfully entered the next interval, but Larsen did not. Failure to enter the next interval means failure of advancement, but Larsen's nebula did not break, but entered a neutral state. The so-called neutral state means that there is no nebula breaking, no advancement success, and no way to return to the original self. Simply put, the backlash of energy only backfired his consciousness and memory. With a powerful silicon-based life body, Larsen survived, but his memory and consciousness could no longer be used by him, but were only stored in the depths of his brain, which led to Larsen becoming a giant without civilization. Because the experimental site was on the Ruby Star, Larsen became a mysterious giant on the Ruby Star, but the energy in Larsen's body was still expanding, so swallowing Red Ren could help Larsen suppress the pain of this energy expansion. As for Mayo, he disappeared and there was no trace of him. This became the most entangled part for Li Ming. The formula and method for synthesizing Rinxu were available, but the final results were completely opposite, one success and the other failure. This also made Li Ming a little embarrassed. Of course, there are two ways to find the answer. One is to continue to dig deep into Larsen's memory and get information from it. The other is for Li Ming to study the formula in depth to see if he can find some clues. But both methods are difficult, because Larsen's remaining memories are after his interval advancement. Those memories have been severely damaged. Compared with the previous photo memories, the remaining memories are some fragments, just like photos, that have been torn into pieces. It is naturally very difficult to find the answer from them. The other is the formula. Li Ming needs to find all the materials and then synthesize them. Judging from practice, this is naturally not easy. Although it is very difficult, Li Ming still has to try as much as possible. After all, if you use Hangren to advance little by little, it will take longer, not to mention that Li Ming's demand for advanced materials is 3 times that of others. Thinking about this information in his mind, Li Ming's figure has unknowingly come to the sky above mountain. This mountain is no different from other mountains in the mountain range. The only difference is that this mountain has a barrier, which is exactly the coordinate position provided by the metal ball. After looking around, Li Ming flew down directly. There was nothing unusual on the bare mountain top except for the rocks. Li Ming's eyes swept and immediately locked onto a rock, then took out the metal ball. The blue light flashed, and the metal ball opened a portal on the surface of the rock. Li Ming smiled slightly and walked in directly. Passing through the portal, Li Ming's figure came directly to a round platform. At this time, there were already 3 people standing on the round platform, namely Abel, Xenia and Jija. When he saw Li Ming coming in, Xenia smiled first and said, "I'm back." Li Ming also smiled slightly, bowed slightly to the 3 people in front of him, and said, "It's just a small matter. I've kept you waiting for a long time. If there is nothing else, let's get started." Li Ming continued. Abel nodded slightly, then turned his eyes and raised his hand to point at the void. The rings began to rotate immediately. These rings were the same as the teleportation array that Li Ming used to come to Hangayu Star before, so the operation process was no different. As the rings rotated, the strong light flashed for a while and then disappeared. At the same time, in a building on Isaiah, a dazzling white light flashed, and 4 figures appeared at the same time. They were Li Ming, Yabel and others. They returned to Isaiah. Those bright crystal block interiors still make people feel comfortable. These interiors make the space inside the building full of energy and light. Compared with the dark Ruby Star, it is naturally many times better. After walking out of the teleportation array, under the leadership of Yabel, Li Ming and the other 3 came to a separate closed room. There are many teleportation arrays in the building complex of the resource management building, corresponding to different areas and locations. Alliance leaders like Abel can often enjoy the best position. Both teleportation ends have neat supporting facilities. For example, conference rooms, equipment rooms, etc. The room they entered was the temporary conference room. The room was relatively closed and not big, but there were many interior decorations inside, and the energy atmosphere was strong. It was really a good place. The four came to the meteorite table in the middle of the house, and sat down one after another. Li Ming was calm and composed. After turning his eyes to scan the other three, he did not say a word. At this time, Abel smiled slightly and said, first, I was not in a hurry to hold this high-level meeting, but I thought that the current situation is quite serious, so I'm eager to discuss this matter with you. Oh. Li Ming pretended to be doubtful, smiled slightly, looked at Abel and said, how dare I, who has just joined the Huai Alliance not long ago, get involved in the major events of the Alliance? Zener immediately waved his hand and smiled. It seems that you don't know yet. We have announced a message to all member star systems of the Huai Alliance, that is, to promote you, Li Ming, to a permanent staff member of the Huai Alliance headquarters. Chapter 348, Permanent. A permanent member of the Alliance headquarters, his status will be second only to that of Abel. Such a high treatment surprised Li Ming. Although Li Ming knew that Abel intended to win him over, he did not expect that he would be given such a high position. Li Ming looked at the three people in front of him with some surprise, his face showing a puzzled look, and he did not say much under his puzzled eyes. Facing this position that everyone wants, Li Ming behaved so calmly, which also surprised these people, but Xenia immediately continued. In fact, during the energy duel that day, we saw that your strength was extraordinary. We originally planned to discuss this matter with you after returning from Ruby Star. Unexpectedly, some accidents happened before going to Ruby Star again, so we are anxious to discuss this matter with you. Accident? Li Ming frowned slightly, pretending to be curious and surprised. Xenia nodded gently and sighed slightly, but did not say much, just looked at Abel. Abel did not shy away from it and said directly, that's right. According to our information monitoring, several star systems outside the Milky Way are on their way to us. The star system war is inevitable. At this critical moment, our Huai Alliance must coordinate and arrange the high-level combat power to protect our resources. Your strength, Li Ming, is obvious to all, so it is not an exaggeration to give you the permanent qualification. Abel continued. Through his wisdom eyes, Li Ming naturally saw it. In order to cope with the upcoming star system war, compressing combat power and protecting resources are naturally the most important. Li Ming's ability to be reused is naturally due to his strength. Of course, promotion to permanent staff is also a good thing for Li Ming. Because Li Ming still has many things to do on Isaiah, this identity is even more critical to Li Ming. After a brief thought, Li Ming smiled and replied, I'm flattered that Commander Abel is so kind to me. However, since I, Li Ming, have joined the Huai Alliance, I naturally have to contribute my strength at the critical moment. This is understandable, so I have no objection to this matter. Abel was satisfied with this, and after a few chuckles, he nodded and said, in this case, it couldn't be better. We have already notified all the star systems in the Alliance about your appointment, and we will make a formal announcement in the next few days. I have arranged an office area and accommodation for you. I will take you to see it now, Abel said. Li Ming was shocked when he heard this, and waved his hand and said, don't bother Commander Abel. I can go there by myself. As he said this, Li Ming stood up. Seeing this, Abel smiled and nodded, saying, that's good. You should get familiar with the environment here. After all, you will live here for a long time in the future. Li Ming smiled lightly and replied, there is nothing else. I will take my leave first. Abel glanced at Xenia and Jija, and nodded without saying anything. Li Ming glanced at the three of them, and then stepped away. Leaving the conference room, Li Ming's figure flashed, and came to the corridor outside. With a flip of his right hand, the metal ball appeared again. There was all the information Li Ming wanted. After taking a look, he left quickly. Walking along the corridor, Li Ming was ready to leave here and go to his residence to take a look, but just when Li Ming came to the portal at the end of the corridor, the portal suddenly flashed, and a tall and fat alien suddenly walked out. This person was 2 meters tall, fat, and had a round head like a winter melon. When he saw Li Ming, his eyes immediately showed strange colors and his expression changed. Li Ming just glanced at the other person and didn't care. He turned sideways, ready to bypass this person and leave through the portal. As Li Ming came to the side, the fat alien also moved and blocked Li Ming. Li Ming paused, raised his head slightly, and looked at the other person calmly. "Are you the newcomer?" The fat alien looked down at Li Ming with disdain. Li Ming said nothing, and his eyes narrowed slightly. After the two looked at each other, the fat alien couldn't help but snorted and said, "A new first-level civilization wants to become a permanent member of the Alliance. Interesting." Li Ming smiled slightly, not caring at all. He moved again, and came to the other side, bypassing this person again, ready to leave. Walking past this person, and arriving in front of the portal, just as Li Ming was about to leave through the portal, the fat alien suddenly said, "Be careful, the position of permanent member of the Alliance is not suitable for you." Li Ming stood still in front of the portal, turned his eyes to the corner, glanced at the other party, and then went directly into the portal and left. The fat alien then walked quickly into the depths of the corridor. Passing through the portal at the end, the fat alien entered the meeting room. When Abel and others saw the fat alien, they all showed strange expressions. Abel said directly, "Valentine, what's the matter?" The fat alien named Valentine came directly to the meteorite table and sat down with an ugly expression. After looking at the 3 people at the table, he said, "Isn't that guy named Li Ming not suitable for the position of permanent staff of the Alliance?" Abel paused first, looked at Valentine, and said, "What do you mean?" Valentine smiled slightly and said, "Commander Abel, in terms of qualifications, the guy named Li Ming is just a newcomer. In terms of strength, my 1.1 level power civilization, how can it be inferior to him?" Abel seemed to understand Valentine's intention of coming here. He couldn't help shaking his head and chuckled twice. Then he stood up and said, "Let Zena and Gija talk to you about this matter. I still have some things to deal with." Having said that, Abel turned around and left. Seeing Abel leave, Valentine was stunned. He didn't understand what Abel meant by this. After watching Abel leave, his eyes immediately turned to Xenia and Gija. He shook his head and stammered, What does this mean?" Xenia also turned his eyes back to Valentine after watching Abel leave, and then said, "Valentine, how strong are you? Everyone in Ahua Alliance knows it. Even in the eyes of other alliances, you are the 4th combat power of Ahua Alliance. But, Gija and I didn't compete with Li Ming for this permanent member, so why do you have to intervene?" Xenia continued. Valentine couldn't help but become tough after hearing this, and said sternly, "Xenia, this is your fault. Why did you give him the permanent position?" Zenia's face changed slightly, and he said, "Valentine, Li Ming became a permanent resident because of our discussion with Abel. It's not something that anyone can do, and it's not given to anyone. You'd better not interfere in this matter." Valentine still looked dissatisfied, but there was a lot of confusion in his eyes. After hesitating for a while, he said, "Xenia, since it has come to this, I will speak frankly. My strength, Valentine, is second only to the 3 of you in the Alliance. I naturally dare not think too much about the permanent position, but it is definitely not the turn of the newcomer. After all, my position in the Alliance headquarters also determines the status of my galaxy." Valentine continued. As soon as these words were spoken, Xena already understood the meaning of his words, and his eyes couldn't help but look at Gija. As everyone knows, being able to hold an important position in the Alliance will directly determine the status of your own galaxy, which also provides a lot of convenience for obtaining more resources. In short, in the Alliance, strength, status, and resources are closely related. Even if the Hua Alliance wants to expand the 3 major forces to the 4 major forces, it will not be the turn of Li Ming, the newcomer. In terms of qualifications and rank, Li Ming is not as good as Valentine. Now Li Ming has not only entered the 4 major forces of the Alliance, but also become a permanent resident second only to Abel, which makes Valentine even more dissatisfied. Valentine's words just now have expressed this very clearly. Gija glanced at Valentine with contempt, snorted coldly, and said, "Well, since you raised this doubt, then I will tell you why we elected Li Ming as a permanent resident. Chapter 349 7 Elemental Tales. Valentine, since we are talking about strength, do you know how strong Biggs is in the Huff Alliance? Yeager looked at Valentine and asked coldly. This question made Valentine startled and puzzled, not knowing why the other party asked this question. After hesitating for a while, he said, Biggs is the strongest force in the Huff Alliance. He has a rare aerospace civilization, and also possesses a divine weapon. Although he is only a 1.1 level civilization, only Commander Abel can fight against him in our alliance. Yeager nodded with satisfaction. But Valentine hurriedly asked again, what does this have to do with the newcomer? Yeager then snorted and said, we and a Beryl saw the fight between Li Ming and Biggs in the records of a blue spirit beast. Having said that, Yeager stared at Valentine and continued, this man is invincible in the battle with Biggs. Just this point, who in our alliance can match him? Valentine was stunned. When he heard this, his brows tightened, his eyeballs kept rolling in his eye sockets. After thinking for a few seconds, he suddenly shook his head and whispered, impossible, impossible. He is a first level civilization. How could it be possible? Valentine couldn't accept this reality and kept shaking his head. At this time, Zenny smiled lightly and said, it's normal that you don't believe it. Commander Abel and I also found it hard to believe. But after the battle with Biggs, this man killed Melvin and Mercer, and Abel and I saw it with our own eyes. Valentine suddenly widened his eyes and his face changed instantly when he heard this. He said, kill Mercer and Melvin? Zenny nodded lightly, sighed slightly, and said, although Melvin is a first level civilization, he has spiritual civilization, so it is not easy to kill. Not to mention Mercer, who has a 1.2 level civilization, and is the 4th strongest in the Heth Alliance. Do you think there's anything wrong with giving such a master a permanent position? Valentine's face suddenly became silent, his eyeballs kept rolling in his eye sockets, and he couldn't say a word from his trembling lips. Xenia continued, to be honest, the only ones who know this person best are Robertson and Elks of the Tillmans. Abel and I don't know much about this person either. With the upcoming galactic war, this person is very important to our alliance, so you'd better not provoke him. Xenia's tone was even longer, as if he was reminding Valentine. Valentine's body suddenly trembled when he heard this, as if he was electrocuted, and his face turned pale instantly. He immediately remembered his conversation with Li Ming in the corridor. Now he heard this, and couldn't help but feel scared. With a look of fear on his face, he muttered, yes, we can't provoke him. As he whispered to himself, Valentine seemed to have thought of something, and quickly stood up and said, I still have some things to deal with over there, so I'll leave first. As soon as the voice fell, Valentine turned around and left in a hurry. Xenia didn't understand why he left so suddenly, but he still didn't say a word, just glanced at Yeager beside him in confusion. At this moment, Li Ming has arrived at his new residence, a crystal building located inside the construction area. The appearance of this building is no different from other buildings, and it is also very close to various institutions in the construction area. It can be said that this place is completely prepared for high-level staff of the Alliance. The position itself is not attractive to Li Ming, but on the planet Isaiah, this position can provide Li Ming with a lot of convenience. Sitting in a closed room, there are already 3 small beasts in front of Li Ming, which are Mer Walker and the little fox beast. Walker is still in a coma, but Mer is already playing with the fox beast. Looking at Walker in front of him, Li Ming fell into deep thought. His expression was indifferent, his eyes were dazed, and he couldn't help whispering, although his life was saved, why is he still in a coma? Is it a side effect of the ability of equation? Or? Li Ming touched his chin and couldn't understand the reason for a while. Li Ming was deep in thought, while Mer, who was standing beside him, stared at the fox beast's tail and looked at it. He looked at the fox beast's 7-colored tail for a while, and then looked at his own feathers. He said, little guy, the hair on your tail is so beautiful. Can you lend me some to decorate my feathers? As he said this, Mer had come to the side of the fox beast. The little fox beast opened its eyes wide, shook its head, and made a low roar. Looking at the fox beast shaking its head, Mer immediately showed an unhappy look. After rolling his eyes for a while, he immediately smiled and said, I don't understand what you are saying, so I will take it as your agreement. As soon as he finished speaking, He quickly stretched out his wings and grabbed a silver tail among the 7 tails of the fox beast. On the silver tail, each fine hair was shining with silver light, just like strands of silver. Looking at the silver light, Moore's eyes lit up and whispered, "It's so beautiful." At this time, the fox beast was caught by its tail and hung upside down in the air. It shook its head wildly and made a wow sound. Moore was already immersed in the beautiful silver hair and ignored the fox beast. He slowly raised his left wing and gently pinched a silver hair with 2 wings, just like a person pinching a hair with 2 fingers. Then he pulled hard and actually pulled out the silver hair. With this action, the fox beast let out a painful roar of "ah," and its head suddenly turned sharply, looking at Moore with anger in its eyes, and clenched its teeth with its open mouth. At this time, Moore still ignored it. He held the silver hair with a satisfied look. He looked around his body and finally locked onto the position of his abdomen. He whispered, "Put it here." As he spoke, his left wing had already placed the hair on his abdomen. He looked at the hair on his abdomen with a satisfied look. But after turning his eyes, he stared at the silver tail again. His left wing immediately stretched out, preparing to pull out another hair. The fox beast looked at Moore's tail that was gradually approaching his tail, and suddenly gritted his teeth in anger. At this moment, the entire silver tail suddenly flashed with white light, and the arc jumped, as if a strong voltage was released at once. The white electric arc spread along Moore's wings to his whole body, and his whole body was immediately wrapped in electricity. The sound of the electric current accompanied by the dazzling white light illuminated the entire room. Even Li Ming, who was standing by, was stunned. He had no idea what had just happened. When Li Ming turned his eyes, Moore had fallen to the ground, sticking out his tongue and his eyes rolled back, motionless. Looking at the naughty Moore, Li Ming shook his head helplessly, ignoring him, and his eyes returned to Walker. Although Walker was still alive, he only had a slight breath. All the life signs were still there, but he was still unconscious. This was also what Li Ming was puzzled about. After staring blankly for a while, Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly and thought to himself, if you want to know the true condition of Walker's body, you have to let the flying dragon enter its body. Just as he was thinking this, there was a muffled sound of bang in his ears, and a ball of fire and high temperature rose from his side. Li Ming turned his head quickly to look. Moore fell to the ground. His whole body was black, which was a sign of being roasted by fire. His eyes were still blinking, but one of his wings was still holding a red tail on the fox beast's butt. Li Ming shook his head slightly again, but as soon as Li Ming turned his head, a sound of dong, dong, dong came from the side, just like a stone rolling on the ground. Li Ming turned his head again and saw that Moore's entire body had been frozen into an ice block, and one of his wings was still holding a blue tail behind the fox beast's buttocks. Li Ming looked at the fox beast in surprise, then looked at Moore, shook his head and sighed again, and turned his back to the fox beast and Moore, and looked at Walker with all his attention. Li Ming raised his right hand slightly, and then a beam of green light shot out. The green light was Li Ming's ability, the flying dragon, which flashed into Walker's brain and disappeared. The flying dragon consciousness first entered Walker's brain, but as soon as it entered Walker's brain, Li Ming was startled. His face showed surprise, and his whole body froze in place. Chapter 350, Walker's Unknown Secret. Walker's brain seemed to be another world, surrounded by endless darkness, with no end in sight, but the area in front of him was bright, as if a spotlight had illuminated this area alone. In the light, it was Li Ming's figure. Long was Li Ming's clone. How could Li Ming not be surprised when he was suddenly focused on? This was something Li Ming had never felt in anyone's consciousness. HMPH. I knew you would come in. A deep voice suddenly came out, and the voice seemed to come from deep underground. Li Ming was startled after hearing it, and his eyes immediately looked around. At this moment, the area in front of Li Ming suddenly became bright. A giant beast appeared in the light in front of Li Ming. This giant beast was more than 10 meters tall, and looked like a lion. It lay quietly on the ground. Only the front half of the other party could be seen, and the back half was in endless darkness. The beast existed as a phantom, and it looked extremely ferocious, quite like a lion, but at this moment, it lay quietly on the ground, not showing its original majesty. Even so, Li Ming could clearly sense the powerful aura of the beast, but after a closer look, he found that there were more than a dozen silver chains on the beast's body. One end of the chain was wrapped around the beast, and the other end was in the darkness, and it was unclear where it came from. The beast looked at Li Ming quietly with its eyes and said, "You dare to be Walker's master? You are really not afraid of death?" Li Ming was stunned when he heard this, and he didn't understand the intention, just stared at the other party with his eyes. The corners of the beast's mouth moved slightly, and continued, "It seems that you know nothing about Walker." As he said this, the beast's head gently raised and looked at the darkness around it. As the beast looked at the place, patches of light suddenly appeared, as if the beast's eyes lit up lamps in the darkness. Patches of light appeared around the originally dark surroundings, and these light spots were irregular vortexes, like rotating nebulae. Li Ming was immediately attracted by it. He looked around, and saw the patches of light that looked like nebulae, as if he was already in a vast universe. But when Li Ming narrowed his eyes and looked carefully, his face suddenly changed. Those bright spots that looked like nebulae turned out to be giant beasts. Each beast was different, but they were all phantoms, and were imprisoned by chains. This scene made Li Ming's face pale, and he completely forgot that he was in Walker's brain. Every beast, every light, and every chain were clearly presented in front of Li Ming's eyes. Each of these beasts was extremely powerful, but they were trapped here by chains, making this place like a gloomy prison, terrifying and suffocating. Li Ming's mind was attracted by these, but the giant beast in front of him turned his gaze back to Li Ming and said, "Being on the parallel line of life and death, mastering the dark power, by his side and in front of you, like a mirror, and like another self." The giant beast was still talking, but the voice became more and more vague, and the light became dimmer and dimmer. Li Ming's consciousness began to retreat involuntarily, as if he was involuntarily moving away from this place, farther and farther, farther and farther. Bang, there was a muffled sound in his head, and Li Ming's eyes widened a little. The flying dragon consciousness had returned, as if he had just had a dream. Li Ming looked down, and saw Walker standing in front of him, looking at him, and said, "Are you okay?" Looking at Walker again at this time, Li Ming's face changed slightly, but it immediately returned to normal after a few seconds. After shaking his head slightly, he whispered, "I'm fine. I'm in trouble." Moore's voice came from behind, but the voice was relatively low, and there was a crying tone. Li Ming turned around suddenly, startled, and shrank slightly. He saw Moore lying on the ground in front of him, moving towards Li Ming little by little, with tears in his eyes, but his whole body was completely unrecognizable. The originally bright and beautiful feathers were either scorched or electrocuted into curls, and some even only had a hard little bone in the middle of a feather. Li Ming turned his eyes in confusion, and looked at the fox beast. At this time, the seven-tailed fox beast had an innocent look on his face, as if it had nothing to do with it. But when Walker saw more, his eyes were drooping and he whispered, "Idiot." Li Ming shook his head slightly, then stood up, waved his right hand, and Heng Yunshang behind him floated over. The three little beasts all flashed with light, and were taken into Heng Yunshang and disappeared. After doing this, Li Ming sighed for a long time, blinked his eyes slightly, and thought to himself, "Walker, what's going on?" Thinking of this, Li Ming's face kept changing. After all, the strange phenomenon in Walker's brain made Li Ming unable to understand for a while, and he couldn't understand what the giant beast in his brain said. In addition, Walker had been in a coma, but suddenly woke up, and excluded Li Ming's consciousness from his brain. This is a very puzzling phenomenon. Li Ming's consciousness has never encountered such a situation. After a long breath, Li Ming didn't think about it carefully. He shook his head slightly, and walked towards the portal in the distance. Regarding Walker, Li Ming could only temporarily not study it, because there were indeed too many strange places, including those giant beasts and what they said, and Li Ming didn't even find Walker's memory. These were forcibly terminated with Walker's awakening. Putting aside the thoughts about Walker, Li Ming began to think about another thing, which was the 6-domain Maxing Hukang star. This was what Li Ming found in Larson's brain, and Li Ming also recorded the last storage location of the star. At this moment, Li Ming was going to find this thing. The place where Li Ming lives is a multi-story building, and each room has its own use. One of them is used to store aircraft. This is naturally for the convenience of Li Ming's travel. After all, Li Ming is already a permanent resident second only to Abel. Leaving the building, driving the aircraft directly to the distance. According to the coordinates recorded by Li Ming, the aircraft continued to fly in the air, and the geographical features of Isaiah were fully revealed. On this huge planet, in addition to the crystal block area, there is an ordinary rock area. In addition to the location of the Alliance headquarters, the Isaiah people are divided into 2 civilizations and multiple tribes. They coexist peacefully, and are distributed in different regions. With the technology of advanced civilization, the aircraft that Li Ming rides can fly anywhere he wants to go in one day. According to the coordinate position, the location of the Hukang star of the 6th domain Mang star is exactly in the area controlled by biological civilization. The area covered by crystal blocks on the planet is where silicon-based life exists, and the rock area without crystal blocks is a lifeless area. This is like the land and ocean on the human Earth. Humans only live on land. The difference is that most of the area here is covered by crystal blocks, and the area without crystal blocks only occupies a small part. After flying for half a day, Li Ming came to the sky above a crystal block area, and the flight speed also slowed down. The crystal block area below is not large, only equivalent to a small city, and it is surrounded by rock areas, like an isolated island with rock areas. And this is exactly where Li Ming is looking for. The aircraft circled for a while, and lowered its altitude. Looking down from the sky, this area has been taken into Li Ming's eyes. Although it has not landed yet, his eyes have completely grasped the appearance of the entire city. Looking at it, Li Ming couldn't help but frowned, with a puzzled look on his face. This crystal block building area looks relatively old, and the surface of those crystals is dim, and some places are even dilapidated. The color degradation and varying degrees of damage give people a feeling of being abandoned for a long time. The aircraft slowly landed in an open area inside the building area. The hatch opened, and Li Ming walked out. Standing there and looking around, Li Ming's face also became gloomy. There was no sign of life here. It was very quiet, like coming to a city that had been abandoned for many years, dead silent. From the coordinates in Larson's memory, it must be here, but why is it here? Li Ming whispered, and began to walk slowly into the depths of the construction area. His feet walked slowly, and his eyes kept looking around. From this sign, the probability of finding the 6th domain Maxing Hukang star may be very low, but since he was here, Li Ming still had to go and take a look. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.